We need to show people how it can work for them and that we care that they show up and that their elected officials are responsive.
Congresswoman Deborah Ross of North Carolina, we so appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you.
It's my pleasure.
And ABC News projects that Trump will win the Alabama Republican primary based on the analysis of the vote. ABC News also projects that Biden will win the Colorado Democratic primary based on analysis of the vote. And in the Republican race in Colorado, ABC News projects that Trump will win the Colorado Republican primary based on the analysis of the vote, with 48% of the vote in there. Now I want to bring in our reporter, Mola Lange, who's in Colorado for us. And Mola, of course, just yesterday, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed Colorado's Supreme Court, saying Donald Trump could remain on the ballot there and not be removed for alleged insurrection. How have Republicans been responding to that news?
Well, yeah, Lindsay, Republicans and, in particular Trump supporters certainly view it as a victory, as something that vindicates their support for the former president. It certainly provides some clarity also for voters who intended on voting for Donald Trump. Lindsay, that's something that you ask Republicans. It's something that they say that should have happened, and continue to support Donald Trump as a result.
Any indication that it might be impacting the way Coloradans are voting today?
Well, as you can imagine, Lindsay, Democrats and those who don't support Donald Trump continue, certainly didn't no impact on them. Republicans, as we mentioned, certainly feeling vindicated, especially, as it feeds into the narrative that the former president is constantly under attack by his opponents, using the judicial system to persecute him politically. And so in that way, certainly re-energizing, perhaps, a lot of Trump supporters here. But, in terms of, whether it impacted the way folks vote, a lot of folks had their minds made up. In fact, most Colorado primary voters vote with mail-in ballots. 98%, in fact, vote mail-in ballots. So, a lot of those votes, a lot of those ballots cast prior to yesterday's Supreme Court ruling. So a lot of folks certainly had to mail those in prior to that and already had their minds made up.
Makes sense. And I have to wonder what that impact might have been. Mola Lange for us in Colorado. Thanks so much. Joining us now is John Carl, our chief Washington correspondent, also co-anchor of This Week. John, just curious to get a sense, just a check here for us. Are you surprised that Nikki Haley is still in this race?
Well, I'm not, because look, Nikki Haley is doing something here beyond running in this election. She is trying to position herself as the alternative to Donald Trump, positioning herself to be able to say, after the 2024 election, I told you so. 2020, a central theme of her campaign is it really finally started to heat up. She started to really take on Trump, was that he's a loser. This guy cannot win. I can win. So, I think that her position here is to take this fight till absolutely the last moment, show that she was willing to do so, and be able to, point to this afterwards. I don't think she's under any delusion that she was going to win tonight and somehow, capture this nomination, but she wanted to stay as long as she absolutely could.
And what kind of bragging rights does "I told you so" get you?
Probably not much, especially if you look at how much she is really disliked by the Trump base of the party. This is what she tried to avoid. This is, look, Nikki Haley's been all over the map on this. If you remember, after January 6th, she had some of the most devastatingly harsh criticism of Donald Trump, saying that we should never have followed him. Those were her words. After January 6th, she got a lot of blowback after that. And it wasn't long after that, a few months later, where she was asked, would you run for president if Donald Trump ran? She said, no, I wouldn't run for president if Donald Trump ran. Well, she ended up running anyway, but she really held her punches. She did not take Trump on in any significant way until way into this election, until right before the Iowa caucus, when she finally started to take the fight to him.
Do you think that we can read any tea leaves, perhaps, in that in all the previous primaries, she would say, and I'm headed to this place next. I'm going to this place next. She hasn't talked about the states beyond Super Tuesday. She pretty much kind of vowed, I'm going to stay until at least Super Tuesday. Should we read anything into that at all, that maybe this is the last stand?
Yes, I would definitely read into that. And there's nothing on the schedule. There's nothing, beyond tonight. And what's she doing tonight? There's no victory party tonight. Which of these Super Tuesday states is she in tonight? She's not. She's in South Carolina, which, as we remember, already voted. She's at home in Charleston. So I think she should take stock of this. I do not expect we're going to hear anything decisive from her tonight about dropping out. But she certainly. I mean, she was an ambassador, governor. Right. She knows math. I mean, she knows what the delegates are. Right. She's an accountant. She likes to tell you she's an accountant. She knows where this is going. But I think she'll take a beat, and she'll want to give. I think, to me, what the interesting thing is, what does she do about Donald Trump? Does she ultimately endorse him? Right. It sure doesn't sound like that. But again, we've seen Nikki Haley on all sides of this. What does she do when she makes the statement that she is suspending her campaign? It will be a suspension of her campaign. What does she do? And does she signal that the fight goes on? And she seems to have closed the door on a third-party run, but that conversation I don't think is over either.
Potentially, you think she might embrace no labels?
I think it's unlikely. She's come pretty close to slamming the door shut on it. But when you listen to her speeches over the past few weeks, she sounds a bit like a no labels candidate. Ever since she started with that talking point, it's a pretty good one, by the way. 70% of the country says they don't want either one of these guys. They don't want Biden and they don't want Trump. I mean, that sounds like, hey, well, could there be another way to go? Could there be a third party? But no labels is having some real challenges in and of itself. I mean, they're only on the ballot in I think it's like 15 or 16 states now. They're in a bit of disarray. That doesn't necessarily look very attractive to her. I think she wants to maintain her viability to lead a post-Donald Trump Republican Party.
There are a number of people who mistakenly think that basically, if she maybe gets convicted, that she would be the heir apparent, that maybe she would have a few. But explain why that is faulty thinking.
Absolutely not. First of all, these delegates that get elected, they are Trump delegates. So if something were to happen that were to force Donald Trump out of the race, and by the way, a conviction does not force him out of the race. He can get elected from a jail cell, and we've seen politicians in this country get elected from jail. It's been a while, but we've seen it happen. Matthew Lyons, the last one I remember. By the way, he was a congressman from Vermont, which Nikki Haley may win tonight. So maybe there's a message there. But these are also going to be a Trump convention that is going to choose if for some reason Trump were forced out of the race, and they're not going to choose Nikki Haley. I mean, Nikki Haley is the enemy of this Trump-centered Republican Party right now. But again, she's counting on, if November is a disaster for Donald Trump, like a phoenix, she will rise from the ashes.
I could talk to you all night. I have at least one more for you. How much does Donald Trump need Nikki Haley once she drops out to embrace him? Because, you do have those 30-40% of the vote who are saying, those Haley voters who are saying, look, I'm parking my votes here, and it remains to be seen, are they going to go over to Trump? And when you look at those voters, large swaths of them are saying, look, if he's convicted, he's not fit. Look, if he is the nominee, I'm not going to support him. And so does he need her to kind of give those voters cover and say, hey, let's go, let's support Donald Trump?
I don't think he needs Nikki Haley, but he needs Nikki Haley's voters. I think this is an important distinction because she's getting anywhere. Well, now we see on today, it'll be some states like Oklahoma where we at like 15%. Vermont, she may get 50%. But she's getting between 20, 30, 40% of the vote in most states. Those are not, by and large, diehard. I love Nikki Haley. I'll do anything for Nikki Haley. I want Nikki Haley to be president. Those are people who have serious reservations about Donald Trump. And Nikki Haley is the vessel. That is where they can park their opposition to Donald Trump. So That's his problem. And again, I think even if Nikki Haley came out tomorrow and embraced him, I'm not sure those people would run Donald Trump. So he needs to find a way to bring back in Republicans that have been entirely alienated by him and the independents that have been alienated by him. The Nikki Haley
who he
voters.
said he doesn't even need. He doesn't want,
I don't want those votes.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, this. I remember during the Arizona Senate race in 2022, Carrie Lake going out at one point and saying that she didn't want the votes of people that supported John McCain. Well, she didn't get them, and she didn't win. Turns out you want the votes. You know?
Jonathan Karl, talk to you all night. Appreciate you. We'll be joining you in just a little bit. In the Texas race for president for the Democrats, ABC News can project that Biden will win the Texas Democratic primary based on the analysis of the vote. And for Republicans, ABC News projects that Trump will win the Texas Republican primary based on analysis of the vote. Immigration, of course, is increasingly a top issue for voters. Gallup found that 28% of Americans overall said immigration is the United States' most important problem, up from 20% in January and 9% last August in their polling. Joining us now to do a deeper dive on that topic is our Maria Villarreal. Maria, thanks for joining us again. Talk to us about this 28%. Are we talking all voters, or is there a distinction here that needs to be made?
Definitely a distinction here. The majority of the people that we're talking about that put immigration at the top of their list, their priority list. I mean, we are talking about Republican voters. But if California is an indicator, that clearly has started to change as we really start to get into this election year. I mean, they obviously have polling coming out of California today showing that, you know, the economy was a big deal to them, top of their priority list, but then right underneath that is immigration. I think that's what we're going to continue to see all across the board here. As, you know, 2024 creeps closer to that November timeframe where we're going to see the big election happen.
As someone who is consistently on the ground doing the in-depth work, should there be cause for concern, and could this impact voters?
Absolutely. Look, I think that voters right now that we have continued to talk to, whether it be here in El Paso, along the border, Eagle Pass, Rio Grande Valley, but really all around the state of Texas and this region, many of them are saying, listen, we're just concerned that nothing is going to be done, that immigration is going to continue to be a political issue, but not necessarily a point of compromise for both sides of the aisle. We mentioned earlier, this becomes a political piñata with both sides of the aisle, you know, hitting at this issue, trying to get voters to come to the polls. But in the end, it doesn't necessarily result in actual action happening. Obviously, we've seen that with Biden down at the border talking about the security deal, the security funding, but not able to get that, you know, across the finish line. Trump, on the other hand, is continuing to use this. It is in his best benefit, in his best interest, to not have the immigration issue solved in the next, you know, 6 to 8 months. Because if it does, if he comes to the table, he decides that he's going to, you know, compromise with, you know, come to a solution with Biden. If he does that, what else is he going to run on at this point?
Does either candidate, though, have a true workable strategy, a potential solution to fix the core issue?
You know, as of right now, we expected to hear some sort of solution potentially from Trump when he was in Eagle Pass for his own visit last week. In fact, he sent out a press release a few hours beforehand saying as much. And then when he actually got on stage and he started to give his remarks, we didn't hear much of a strategy. We heard a lot of rhetoric, a lot of talk about, you know, migrant crime and the number of people that are here in our country and this being an open border because of Biden's administration, but no solid strategies that would explain to us how we were going to re-implement a program like Remain in Mexico, or how we were going to deport everybody that is talking about deporting. The same goes for the Biden administration. Clearly, we can look at the, you know, border security funding, the fact that it hasn't been able to pass. They haven't been able to get more support for that. It continues to linger, so much so that we're, you know, talking about government funding and the fact that there may not be any because it is holding up the conversation here. So at this point, I'm not really sure we're going to see any true solutions. And I think what voters are most concerned about, Lindsay, is the fact that even when November comes, afterwards, are we still going to be talking about immigration being at the top of the priority list?
Certainly a valid question there, Maria Villarreal, for us. Thank you so much. And ABC News can project that Trump will win the Massachusetts Republican primary based on analysis of the vote. Still much more to get to here on Prime tonight. And to carry us through that coverage, ABC's national correspondent, Mr. Terry Moran, joining us from D.C. As I prepare to head over to join David Muir for a special report at the top of the 10 p.m. hour. Good evening, Terry.
Hello, Lindsay. Thanks very much. Thanks for the coverage of a night that has so far been basically without surprises, deep into the sense that we are getting a rerun of 2020, although it almost seems with higher stakes. So let's talk about Super Tuesday. Let's bring in our Jay O'Brien, who covers Congress and politics for us so well. So, Jay, first let's talk about Texas. Polls closed there. What are some of the races you're watching? What are some of the issues you're watching in Lone Star State?
I think it's worth unpacking Texas for a few reasons. First, to your notion of themes that have nothing changed tonight. In Texas, we saw Donald Trump, obviously, with a massive lead and a massive win, right? So that is, the more things change, the more they stay the same. But when you drill down on Texas, there's one race that I told you I didn't tell you before we came on air about it because I wanted to surprise you with, right? It's a Texas State House race. It's a guy named Dave Phelan, who was the Texas Speaker of the House. He has a primary challenger who's backed by the former president and backed by allies of the former president like Steve Bannon, etc. And really, he's the target of Ken Paxton because Ken Paxton was impeached. The Attorney General of Texas was impeached by the House of Representatives.
This is revenge.
This is a retribution play. And it goes to these broader themes we've been seeing in American politics, particularly in the Republican Party. Because Dave Phelan, when he was Speaker of the House in Texas, they passed hardline border bills and immigration bills. They passed hardline LGBTQ bills. Abortion was a massive issue. And that is not enough tonight to put him in the lead. He is losing significantly to that Trump-backed primary challenger. To get my data right, 55% to 39%. So he's going to get primaried out of his seat tonight.
That is a great story because it does get to that sense that it's about fealty. It's about loyalty to Trump and the Republican Party more than it is about doing the business that the Trump voters want done.
Yeah, and the knives of the further right of the Republican Party came out for this guy because he stepped to Ken Paxton, who is such a Trump ally. Don't forget, Ken Paxton was one of the driving forces behind those legal efforts that failed to overturn the 2020 election.
Right. All right, one more quick question. North Carolina, there's one race there you got guys.
Yeah, Governor of North Carolina getting a lot of headlines tonight. Another Trump-backed candidate, Mark Robinson, who's the lieutenant governor of that state, a controversial figure, has made some controversial comments about it. He is a character. He said things about the LGBT community like they're quote-unquote filth. Trump has endorsed him. He called him Martin Luther King Jr. ×2. He has now secured the Republican nomination.
He's a black man.
He is, yeah, he's African American. He has secured the Republican nomination. He's going to run against Democrat Josh Stein. That is going to be a very hotly watched race. And the reason being is because North Carolina is viewed as very much a swing state. So you've got a very hardline Republican Trump-backed figure versus a Democrat.
In 2022, a lot of those candidates, Kerry Lake and others, they went down to defeat. It's another year, though.
Yeah.
All right, Jay, thanks. We'll get back to you. Let's check in with Avery Harper, who's crunching numbers on the exit polling that's being done today in some of the key states. Avery, what are you finding in that polling?
Hey, Terry. Yeah, we're looking at some of the preliminary exit poll data that we're getting from some key states that headed to the polls today, particularly around the issues that they cared most about as they cast their ballots. In Commonwealth of Virginia, we saw that immigration was the top issue that voters cared about. The economy came in second, foreign policy following that, and then abortion. Really interesting because Virginia is not a border state, but it is one that is next to neighboring Washington, D.C., where we've seen some migrants transported from border states to points north. In North Carolina, immigration is also driving Republican voters and those who came out to vote in the Republican primary to the polls there. You see these anxieties about what's happening at the southern border really being a driver of folks coming out to cast their ballots. The economy coming second there as well. In the state of California, the most important issue there was the economy. Funny, this is the only border state of this group of states that we've talked about, but immigration is not number one there. The economy is number one in the state of California. And I think we can attribute that to the fact that the state of California is a place that's very expensive to live, one of the most expensive places to live in the United States. And so we are going to be continuing to look at some of that data throughout the night in terms of what we can glean as we look forward to what is now shifting to a conversation about the general election. Terry?
All right, Avery, that's fascinating. Their immigration really rising to the fore in so many states, and even in California, almost 40% say it's a big issue. Avery Harper, thanks very much. So, with polls have closed, really with the first major swing state tonight, with the polls closed in Virginia, let's check in with Mary Alice Park. She's in Virginia, just south of us here in D.C. Mary Alice, ABC News projects that, surprise, surprise, Donald Trump's going to win the Virginia Republican primary. Excuse me. Although, what else have you found there?
Yeah, Terry, Nikki Haley needed to run up the score in this part of the state. And she did that. She overperformed in the suburbs right across the river from D.C., winning by large margins. But it just wasn't enough, because as soon as you got closer to West Virginia and further south, the numbers really swung towards the former president. And this number stuck out to me. 79% in our exit polls, 79% white evangelical Christian voters here in Virginia backed the former president. That continues to be such a strong voting bloc for him. And in our exit polls in Virginia, we found that Haley only ran even with Trump on college-educated voters. That's the kind of voter she needed to really overperform with. What's interesting, though, this part of the state, like I said, this was very friendly Haley territory. I unsurprisingly talked to almost all Haley voters who came out to vote for her here behind me today in Alexandria. And all of them, every single one, Terry, told me they were not planning to vote for Trump in the general election. That didn't mean they consider themselves Democrats. Everyone said that they were lifelong Republicans, but these are the kind of voters that have just felt like they didn't have a home in the Trump Republican Party these last few years. Virginia has really showcased that dynamic these last few elections. And so Virginia will be one of those states we are watching so closely still ahead of November.
Absolutely changing demographics. They're turning it really into a purple state, as you're hearing. Let's get into the campaign strategy there. I guess you were at a rally in Richmond, where we understand Donald Trump made some comments that just were shocking. If you think of politics as a game of addition, not subtraction, Trump seemed to go the other way. What did he say?
Yeah, absolutely. At his rally, he said over and over he wanted the Romneys out of the party. He wanted them completely gone. He got the crowd riled up at this line about kicking moderates out of the Republican Party. And to your point, at this stage in a campaign where Trump is doing so well, where he has been dominating, sweeping all of the early states, expect that a candidate would start appealing to the opponent's own voters, would start out, an outreach campaign to Nikki Haley voters. That was the opposite of what we saw this weekend. And that has really landed with Nikki Haley's voters. They don't feel seen in the MAGA movement. They take his words seriously when he says he doesn't want them to be a part of his movement. And that is going to be really tough for him going forward. I mean, where do those Nikki Haley voters go if they don't feel like they have a home in the Republican Party? We don't know the answer to that yet. We don't know if they'll vote for Joe Biden, of course. We don't know if they'll just stay home. But it was surprising to me on the eve of Super Tuesday that he was not interested in sort of extending an olive branch there.
Yeah, conventional wisdom in presidential elections is that losing candidates' votes come home. But Donald Trump isn't conventional, that's for sure. And what voters in Virginia are saying about, in particular, one of the things that makes Trump so different, he's in court all the time. Here's Sharon Roberts, who we talked to, a Trump supporter, talking about the legal challenges the former president faces.
It's all bogus. It's all bogus. I mean, it's ridiculous, what they're trying to charge him with. They're just trying to slander his name. And that's what they're trying to do, make him look bad in our country. And it's, we the people know it's not the case. So I think what they're doing to him is pathetic.
Well, it does seem, if you're a Trump voter, that every prosecutor, wanted a piece of Donald Trump. Sometimes, maybe with justifications, sometimes not. The juries will make the decision on that. But it felt like it helped Donald Trump and weakened people's faith in institutions like the election process. Do you think that is going to be a deeper problem this time around, that people just aren't going to believe anything about the election that doesn't go their way because they see so much they believe is rigged?
Among Trump's base, absolutely. I mean, when I was at that rally in Richmond, Virginia, I had a number of voters who told me proudly that they were there on the rally at the Capitol on January 6th, that they were happy to look into the camera and explain that they believed so much that the election was rigged last go around. That's why they were there to try to, we all watched what happened on January 6th, to try to stop the election sort of from moving forward, stop the certification of the vote. I mean, there's a deep sense among so many Trump voters that they don't believe it happened and won't believe what happens going forward. They held signs at that Trump rally just last weekend that said, "Too big to rig." The idea being, if so many Trump voters come out, Democrats and be able to rig the vote, continuing to play up that lie, and some of those frankly conspiracy theories about there being a big conspiracy to rig an election is a core part of his message. It's a core part of literally the campaign signage, and it is resonating with his base.
Mary Alice Park, thanks very much for being there in Virginia for us. Appreciate it. Well, we have a projection. ABC News projects that President Biden will win the Minnesota Democratic primary based on the analysis of the vote. And ABC News projects that Donald Trump will win the Minnesota Republican primary based on the analysis of the vote. No surprise there is Nikki Haley getting just 30% of the vote there in that state. So let's talk about this night, Super Tuesday. Let's bring in ABC News contributors Alencia Johnson. She's former advisor to President Biden, and Sarah Isker. She's a former Trump administration official. So, Sarah, let me begin with you. It looks like Super Tuesday is confirming what we all knew, was that we're getting a campaign nobody wanted, it seemed. That this is basically a rerun. Nobody likes reruns. What are we learning tonight about these two incumbents, right, Trump and Biden, and in their primaries?
I mean, that's exactly right. We really should think of these as incumbents running in the primaries. In that case, they look like very weak incumbents. Joe Biden, seeing double digits from uncommitted back last week in Michigan. But even tonight, we're seeing high numbers for people running against the incumbent president in his own party. Donald Trump, obviously, with Nikki Haley, double digits in so many of these states. If you think of them as incumbents, there's a lot for these two campaigns to be very worried about. And you mentioned it earlier, Terry, about voters coming home, as we've seen in previous election cycles. But this doesn't feel like a very normal election. And so the winner may well be the one who can get the most of their voters to come home, so to speak.
And Alencia, we're looking at what looks to be high numbers for uncommitted vote in Minnesota. That's about 15%. That's basically a protest vote against President Biden. What do you think about that?
Yeah, look, I think there are a lot of people who can be frustrated with the uncommitted votes that's happening, and it happened in Michigan last week, and it's happening in Minnesota and a few other states. But I will say, I think the organizers are very smart, and they know that this is a primary, and so that means there's opportunity for the Biden campaign to make up the gap between now and Election Day. If I was the Biden campaign, or if I was on the Biden campaign this cycle, I would actually look at this as an opportunity, because this is direct information for where some of the key parts of the Democratic Party base is. Listen, majority of the Democratic Party base actually supports a ceasefire. That doesn't mean that majority of them supported voting uncommitted, but there is a substantial number that could cost President Biden and certain key swing states the election if him and his administration do not move on the policy around Gaza, the ceasefire, as well as some voters have talked about housing, student debt. There are so many other issues. But again, I look at this as information and time for President Biden and his team to really speak to those voters about the things that they need to hear from this White House. And some of that I think we'll hear on Thursday, the State of the Union, because quite frankly, we know that unfortunately, the White House has a little bit of a messaging problem when it comes to the actual things that they have done for a lot of these voters that they just don't know about. And so I think it's good information for us. I would be more concerned if this was election night, the general election night. But right now, I look at this as information.
Yeah, kind of a warning sign, flashing warning sign. And it sounds like the White House is getting their message. Vice President Kamala Harris coming out and saying ceasefire now. Basically, the president trying to, forgive more student debt, try to get at some of those voters. So let's talk about having faith in the political process in the Democratic Party. I asked Sarah about that. There are reasons for a lot of rank-and-file Democrats to be disaffected as well. You touched on them a little bit. That's so important for turnout. How do you read that faith and trust in the process in the Democratic Party?
Yeah, I think this is a messaging and an education game. And I always say that we are never going to have elections like we did many cycles ago because there's so many mediums of information. And so the ways in which presidents and White Houses and administrations have spoken to voters about their needs, those tried and true ways are no longer working in an era of social media and AI and all of the ways in which the government and presidential campaigns and candidates and all of these entities and institutions have to make sure they're reaching voters. And so in addition to communicating what they are doing, they're having a hard time educating voters about the different levels of government and why, you voted over and over for Democrats, but it seems as though some of the issues you care about can't get over the line. Well, look, Republicans and Donald Trump, they actually do win when it comes to messaging, right? They are the ones that actually, say no to federal funding and then blame the Democrats for issues within their states. They're able to go on air and talk about that in ways that Democrats haven't quite figured out a way to talk to everybody within our big tent party. But I do think that this cycle, and we're seeing this urgency, particularly around this vote. Like, had this uncommitted vote not happened, we wouldn't actually be paying attention to it in the way that I see that the campaign and this administration is right now.
Great point. And President Biden's style of communication and leadership is old-fashioned. He trusts that if he does the right thing and there are results, that people feel confidence will lift back up. Now, he may have to change his tactics a little bit, as you suggest. Back to you, Sarah, for just a moment, about the Supreme Court's decision in Colorado on whether or not Trump can be disqualified under the 14th Amendment's insurrection clause. The court said no unanimously. Again, what was the point of that effort in some ways? It was always bound to fail, it seems to me. And what broader implications could it have?
Well, it's very interesting, as you talked, for instance, earlier tonight about Nikki Haley's potential to run as a third-party candidate. A lot of people pointing out that once you've run on the ballot in a primary, 45 or so states have what's called sore loser laws, meaning that you're not allowed to then run in the general election with a different party than the one you ran in the primary for. But based on the reasoning that the Supreme Court used in that Colorado decision that we read earlier this week, that states cannot set new guidelines for federal candidates, I think that actually Nikki Haley would not be bound by those sore loser laws, that those would be thrown out by courts under this ruling, which, nobody was really thinking about sore loser laws when we were talking about the insurrection clause in the 14th Amendment. But I think it has big implications for that possibility.
Fascinating. Hadn't thought of that. And one more for you. In Vermont now, we're taking a look at the board. There's 68% of the vote in for the Republican primary altogether. And now less than 1% separates Donald Trump and Nikki Haley. It's Vermont. But what do you think about that?
Well, it's Vermont. Look, this isn't a swing state that we're talking about or one for the general election. What it does mean is that Nikki Haley is going to pick up quite a few delegates. And don't forget, if something were to happen to Donald Trump, heading into that convention, delegates are currency. And Nikki Haley, by my last count earlier tonight, already had 46 delegates. That ain't nothing. Vermont's going to give her some more. So that currency can always be used to barter and trade in a convention, especially one if, again, something were to happen to Donald Trump. But it is worth reminding viewers, you can even run from jail. There's really nothing preventing Donald Trump from being the Republican nominee at this point.
Right, and every one of those Haley delegates is just going to steam Donald Trump. He'll hate every one of them. Sarah Skirth, Valencia Johnson, thanks very much for being with us. Appreciate it. And let's turn to the Trump troubles now. And our reporter, Aaron Katersky, our senior investigative reporter, he's on these cases all the time. So, Aaron, Trump's got the 91 criminal charges out there and 4 criminal cases, but he's played this jujitsu, this political jujitsu. He turned this into an advantage. He uses the courts as part of his campaign.
every single time he's been in a courtroom where cameras are allowed, former President Trump has found his way to that camera to make remarks and to make sure that he's using these legal cases to his political advantage. But there are limits. He is going to be a criminal defendant here in New York beginning later this month with jury selection in a case that charges him with falsifying business records over a hush payment to Stormy Daniels, harkening all the way back to the 2016 election when the Manhattan District Attorney's Office accuses him of trying to conceal a sex scandal for voters. Jurors in that case are going to be selected from a wide pool, and they're going to be asked questions about their political views of Trump, whether they believe his lie that the 2020 election was stolen, whether they've ever been a member of QAnon or some other kind of fringe group. So it tells you how politics have really interjected themselves in these legal cases, Terry.
Yeah, that'll make those trials very tricky for the judges who have to preside over them. Aaron Kentucky, we'll come back to you later tonight, I'm sure. So joining us now, we're very happy to have the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, Republican governor there. Thanks so much for joining us on this Super Tuesday, Governor. Let's get right to it. I want to talk a little bit about policy here. You're on the cutting edge of what voters say is one of the top issues in this election, immigration. And President Trump has pledged as a policy matter that if reelected, he would immediately launch the largest domestic mass deportation operation in U.S. history, as aides are talking about, using the military, setting up mass deportation camps in Texas. Do you support that? Do you think the American people support that?
So what Donald Trump supports doing is actually enforcing the laws of the United States of America that already exist, that Joe Biden could enforce if he wanted to, but he's not doing it. And what President Trump will do is even more than what he did during his first term in office, and that is he will use every tool available to him to, one, actually secure the border, two, to deny illegal entry, three, to send back to countries those who came across illegally, and then four, by doing so, establish a legal asylum and immigration process as opposed to the storming the gates that exist right now, especially by people who are criminals, by people who are known terrorists. We are dealing with extraordinary dangers today that have never existed in this country before, with known terrorists coming across our border. And Joe Biden is doing absolutely nothing about it. Donald Trump will change all of that and restore normalcy to our immigration process.
Okay, first, a couple things. Thank you for that answer. But one thing, you paint this incredibly dark picture of the people that are coming across the border. You know, you're the governor of Texas, that the vast majority of people are not terrorists. They aren't criminals, thugs, and rapists. Sure, it's a large group of people, so there are going to be some bad people, but aren't most of them basically like my ancestors or my mother-in-law who came from Indonesia for a better life? Not lawfully, and that's the issue, the policy issue. But why paint such a broad brush targeting all these people as evil and deranged?
You need to update yourself about what actually is going on the border. Because as the governor of Texas, I deal with this every single day. And there was a time, like with my wife's family, who is Hispanic, where people came across the border and became citizens, or maybe your family, which I'm unfamiliar with. But what's happening today is very different than what happened with your family or generations before. The people who know that the best are the people who did immigrate here legally, who are very angry about the people who are trying to come across the border illegally. But also I know this because of my work both with the Texas Department of Public Safety and with the Texas National Guard. The Texas Department of Public Safety is arresting people who are on the terrorist watch list. They're arresting people who are wanted for murder. They're arresting people who came to Texas and committed murder. There was a murder that took place in Washington State today. There was the murder of the student at the University of Georgia. There has been assault across the entire country. Not a day goes by without an American being assaulted, it seems, by somebody coming across the border illegally with Joe Biden's permission. And that's why this is the #1 issue in America. Think about this. Why are Americans so up in arms about this issue, and why is it the #1 issue? Because of the catastrophe caused by Joe Biden.
No question. It seems that you use there saying it seems every day somebody's being murdered. It's doing a lot of work. But I want to talk about a word that you use a lot to describe what what's happening at the border. And as I said, you're the responsible public official for so much of that border. You call it an invasion. Last week, a federal judge appointed by Ronald Reagan said surges in immigration do not constitute an invasion under the Constitution. James Madison himself said that invasion is an operation of war, a military operation. And I want to get to the effect of that kind of rhetoric. In your state, the white gunman who killed 23 people in El Paso, Hispanic people, cited this invasion idea as a motive. Don't you think that, A, it's wrong as a matter of law to say that the United States is being invaded by people walking across the border unarmed, and that this is inflammatory and people get hurt by it?
To be clear, what James Madison said, during the ratification conventions, the one that took place in Virginia, Madison made clear to the Virginia Convention that smugglers off the coast of Virginia at that time could be attacked or defended against by the militia of Virginia. What Texas is dealing with are smugglers, here the cartels. So the point is that Texas is dealing with cartels who are smuggling people across our border, just as Madison was talking about how Virginia was dealing with smugglers off the shore of Virginia. The similarities are very, very close. And hence, what Madison was talking about the invasion is exactly about what we're dealing with here in the state of Texas, which is exactly why I am using that language contained in the United States Constitution that authorizes states to use their militia, as James Madison said we could, to defend ourselves from an invasion when the federal government refuses to do so, which it is refusing to do so.
A federal judge has already said that it's not an invasion under the Constitution. My question was about the harm that kind of language can do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure, I meant to clarify you on that. So anyway, that federal judge, the Fifth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals, has put a stay on that one single federal judge's ruling, and the Fifth Circuit Federal Court of Appeals is going to be taking it up. And the verbiage is not intended to rile up people to commit crimes. Texas, let me be clear about this. Texas is a law and order state, and we will go after anybody who harms anybody else. If you're an American citizen and you come to the state of Texas to try to harm somebody, we will arrest you and put you in jail. Same thing goes for any of our fellow Texans.
All right.
As well as anybody who crosses the border.
One more quick question, running out of time here. On another subject, a lot of attention to Alabama's Supreme Court decision concerning IVF. You describe yourself as a pro-life governor. Does life begin at conception for you, and are fertilized embryos in those clinics human beings?
So what Texas done in our law, in the law that I actually signed, it exempted fertilized embryos from the abortion laws in the state of Texas. But more importantly here is the statement that President Trump put out, and that was one that supports in vitro fertilization, and it's a position that's supported by a majority of Americans.
All right. Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, we thank you for being with us. Thanks very much. Good luck. Oh. And we appreciate you being here. And I should just ask, how does the lieutenant governor's race look there?
Sure. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks very much. All right.
Too.
So we thank Governor Abbott, and we go to World News Tonight. Anchor David Muir, our own Lindsay Davis, and the team for a Super Tuesday special report. Stay right here with ABC News Live.
Good Doctor will return new in 2 weeks.
Tonight, it is Super Tuesday across America. The results coming in right now. ABC News live coverage of the race president begins now.
This is an ABC News special. Super Tuesday. Right now, Americans going to the polls. Results coming in from 16 states, already shaping the race for the November election. America on the verge of pivoting to the general election. Will it be a rematch between President Biden and Donald Trump? What voters in both parties are already signaling tonight. Donald Trump looking for a clean sweep against Nikki Haley. Haley has vowed to stay in the race. Voters making immigration and the border a top issue. The economy, inflation easing, the stock market setting records. But are American families feeling it? Abortion rights after overturning Roe versus Wade, and the new battle over IVF. The questions surrounding President Biden and Donald Trump. Their age. and the trials of Trump. Will he go to trial before the November election? Tonight, the results now coming in and where the presidential race stands right now. Our powerhouse political team live across the country as America votes, live on the border, live at the Supreme Court. From ABC News, this is Super Tuesday. Now reporting, David Muir.
Good evening and thanks for joining us on this Super Tuesday, our special coverage of the presidential primary contest tonight. We're watching 16 states tonight. It's now 10 p.m. in the East and polls have closed in 12 of the states where Republicans are voting today. Just look at the map at this hour. Republican voters in 50 states casting their ballots tonight. 865 delegates up for grabs. 36% of the total delegates at stake in the Republican primary. It's been a big night for Donald Trump, continuing his march to the nomination. Every state lit up there. Donald Trump has won tonight, defeating Nikki Haley in every state so far, with voting still underway at this hour in Utah, Alaska, and California. On the Democratic side tonight, 15 states and American Samoa reporting results. Not a surprise here, President Biden handily winning all 13 that have been called so far. Back to the Republican primaries at this hour, Donald Trump and Nikki Haley tonight. Let's take a look. Based on analysis of the vote, ABC News can now project Donald Trump will win the Republican primary in Minnesota. That result just in tonight. Also just in, Donald Trump has won the Republican primary in Massachusetts. Donald Trump has also won in Colorado tonight. Trump wins Alabama. Donald Trump beats Nikki Haley in Texas. Trump wins the Arkansas Republican primary. Donald Trump wins the Republican primary in Virginia. He also won in North Carolina tonight. He beat Nikki Haley in Oklahoma. Donald Trump also wins in Tennessee, the Republican primary there. Trump also wins the Republican primary in Maine. Still outstanding at this hour, a very close Republican primary in Vermont. So as you can see already, the notable headline of the night, the unmistakable signal that the general election is essentially now underway. Donald Trump and President Biden on the verge of an official rematch. If the election were held today, what does that mean? Who is ahead? Where does Donald Trump think he can win this? Where does President Biden think he can pull this off again? And is there any chance that it could be someone other than Trump and Biden come November? We're going to dive into all the questions you have at home. But first, it is still Super Tuesday. Let's not get ahead of ourselves yet. Donald Trump with a sweep so far. Let's get to Rachel Scott. She's live inside Mar-a-Lago tonight, where the former president is at this hour. And Rachel, I imagine the Trump campaign is very happy tonight.
Ecstatic, David. This is shaping up to be a huge night for former President Donald Trump. Heading into Super Tuesday, Trump's senior campaign advisor told me it was not a question of whether or not Donald Trump would be dominant tonight. It was a question of whether or not he could have a clean sweep, go 15 for 15 in the states that are voting today. Already, ABC News projecting that Donald Trump has won at least 10 of the states voting today. So we know the former president is here at Mar-a-Lago. He has been monitoring these results closely. We are told he does have his eye on Vermont. He is watching how close that primary is there. But by the end of the night, Donald Trump's goal is to nearly lock up this Republican nomination, David.
All right, we'll track Vermont right here with you as we're on the air. Rachel Scott beginning our primetime coverage here. Rachel, thank you. Of course, the question, what about Nikki Haley? Does she stay in this race? Let's get right to ABC's Eva Pilgrim. She's in Charleston, South Carolina tonight with the Haley campaign. What are you hearing, Eva?
Well, David, that's the big question that we are asking here tonight. You might notice I'm actually standing outside, and that's because Nikki Haley is not having a public watch party for tonight's event. She is privately watching these results come in. And I don't have to tell you just how unusual that is. In most cases, you will see those candidates having these big parties, but not having a party like this takes the pressure off, forcing her to come out and say something to a crowd so she can wait and make that decision about when she wants to speak. And we are waiting to see what that is. You know, we have talked with her repeatedly about what does a path forward for her look like. And she was very candid with us. You know, she's good at math. She's an accountant. And she's not delusional about what it would take and what she needs. She knew it was an uphill climb. And she said she was staying in this until she wasn't competitive anymore. When the delegate math doesn't make sense, she would then exit. And so we have to see what she takes with these results tonight. But you can't ignore the numbers of people, a meaningful number of Republicans that are voting for Nikki Haley. And that's why she has stayed in this race to this point. She has promised to stay in till Super Tuesday. There are no other events planned outside of this point. I don't know anything about her schedule beyond now, and we are waiting to see what her camp says, David.
All right, Eva Pilgrim with Nikki Haley's campaign tonight. Eva, thank you. Let's get right to our political director, Rick Klein, is over at the board where he always is on these big political nights. Rick, Eva makes a great point. We'll get into Nikki Haley's supporters here in a moment, but it really does appear that Donald Trump is on a march to his third Republican nomination.
That's exactly right, David. And we saw a bunch of states where Nikki Haley hoped to be pretty competitive tonight. That just isn't the case at all. You remember how well she did in New Hampshire? She was looking at the states that neighbor New Hampshire, Maine, Massachusetts, and Vermont as possibilities. Maine looking like it is an absolute blowout, 45, maybe 50-point win there. And even Massachusetts, with all of the Democrats and the independents in that state, a big, wide victory. Now, Vermont, as we talked about, is maybe the one bright spot for her at this hour. She's up by about 400, a little more than 1,400 votes. That's a decent night. If she's able to hold on to that, at least she walks away with one win. And maybe it's a small signal of the skepticism outside there in the Republican Party. But overall, I just ran the numbers on this, David, and it's striking. We see how Donald Trump is marching toward that magic number. He's got 398 new delegates tonight. Nikki Haley, only 10. So Donald Trump is well on his way to getting where he needs to go. It's probably not going to happen tonight or even next week, but within a week or two, even if Haley stays in the race.
There's no question this has been a major night for Donald Trump. Eva Pilgrim brings up this point of Nikki Haley supporters on the country. When you start to get 20% of the vote, 30%, obviously you don't win the delegates, you don't win the state. But those are significant numbers when it comes to the question that was asked in this exit polling about whether or not you would support Donald Trump come November. And certainly the Trump campaign, Rick, is aware of these numbers that she's posting.
Yeah, no question. And look, I've seen this same kind of trend playing out right now tonight in Virginia. This is a state that Donald Trump, we know, is winning tonight, but he's not winning everywhere. And there's parts of the state right around the D.C. area in particular where Nikki Haley's actually winning by a pretty wide margin. Fairfax County, a 17-point lead. Right there in Arlington, just outside of D.C., we're talking about almost a 50-point lead. Those are the kind of voters that a Republican needs to keep in their fold if you're going to win in a state, not just like Virginia, but in North Carolina. And those are the kind of numbers that are a warning sign and maybe an argument for Haley to continue to make this case forward that there's a lot of people in the Republican Party that are not sold on Donald Trump.
All right, Rick Klein takes us right to Lindsay Davis, who's been diving into the exit poll data. I know a couple of these states that had primaries today actually asked the question, if you supported Nikki Haley today, will you support whoever the Republican nominee is come November? And people gave a telling result here.
You're exactly right. And that goes to Rick's point of these potential warning signs as far as you have these fundamental differences between the Nikki Haley voters and the Donald Trump voters. So let's read some tea leaves as far as what tonight means for November potentially. And by tea leaves, I mean the exit polls. So let's take a look. In North Carolina, as far as Nikki Haley voters go, you have 80% of them who are saying, look, even if she's not the nominee, I'm not voting for Donald Trump. So overwhelming majority, but not just there. In California, you see a similar trend with 69% of those Nikki Haley voters saying that they wouldn't go for Trump. More of the same here in Virginia. Again, 69%. And where this becomes potentially problematic for Donald Trump is take a look in Virginia, and we see similar numbers here in North Carolina as well, that these Nikki Haley voters saying that they approve by 51% of Joe Biden's job performance. So perhaps if they can't vote for Nikki Haley, will they potentially vote for Joe Biden?
Yeah, that's the question. Are they up for grabs? It's certainly the Trump campaign and the Biden campaign both know this. They both want Nikki Haley supporters. Mary Bruce, our chief White House correspondent, no surprise, Donald Trump's victories tonight to the Biden campaign. In fact, you've reported in the last 24 hours, Joe Biden, president himself, has said to his campaign, we need to target Donald Trump and far more aggressively here.
Yeah, David, they certainly see this as the kickoff to the general election. And you have seen the president changing his tactic a bit recently. He is ramping up his attacks against Donald Trump. He's really taunting him as a loser. We've heard that repeatedly. He clearly is trying and relishing getting under Donald Trump's skin here a bit. We've also seen the president changing the way he's trying to reach voters. He's been posting a lot more on TikTok, something that's new to Joe Biden. He's been back on late night television. And the president is again outlining what's at the core of this campaign for them. His argument that democracy is really what is on the line in this election. We know they have to walk this fine line, the Biden campaign, of outlining what is the big stakes here while also trying to do a better job of selling and touting the president's accomplishments. And of course, you'll have a big chance to do that during his State of the Union address later this week.
The State of the Union on Thursday this week, and in recent days, both of them being on the border, signals that the President Biden recognizes that a key issue for Donald Trump, the southern border, is perhaps issue number one aiming into this election.
And the Biden campaign and the Biden administration are well aware that this is a real political liability for Joe Biden heading into November. It's why you saw them with that really rare dueling visits down to the border. And the president, in a bit of a shift of a tactic there too, reaching out to Donald Trump Trump inviting him, saying, you know, let's try and work on together at the same time that both Trump and Biden are blaming each other for this crisis. And of course, the president, again, blaming Trump for tanking that bipartisan border deal.
I wonder if he's going to do the same thing Thursday night, inviting Congress to take another look at this bipartisan legislation. I want to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl, because you hear Mary talk about the Biden campaign, saying this is the jump start of the general election. But look at these numbers. We've already been seeing these general election matchups in the polls. New York Times poll, Fox News, Wall Street Journal, our 538 polling average. All of these polls putting Donald Trump up against Biden have Trump ahead by 2 points to 4 points there. And we look back 4 years ago at this point, John Karl, Joe Biden was ahead by 3 or 4 points. This is a significant turnaround 4 years later.
4 years ago, Super Tuesday, the 538 polling average had Joe Biden with an average of 2-point lead over Donald Trump. Also, we have the central theme, really, of Nikki Haley's campaign is that Donald Trump is a loser. With Donald Trump, we lose. I'm the one that can beat Joe Biden. One of the reasons she's had a harder time making that point is because of these polls, because the polls show that Donald Trump, can, and in some cases does, beat Joe Biden. Let's remember, polls this far out from a general election are notoriously unreliable. As we all remember in 2016, throughout that primary campaign, throughout the approach into the fall campaign, Hillary Clinton was going to be a president of the United States. She was not. And I think that with Biden, you see his flaws are present before the American people every single day. He's president of the United States. Their concerns manifested with the president of the United States. You're going to have a campaign where the Biden campaign is going to be very well funded and very well motivated to remind the country what Donald Trump is all about.
And their tact tonight is by saying that we haven't even started yet, essentially. That here we go. Let's bring in Rick Klein, because, Rick, you actually went into these numbers a little further, the battlegrounds, where obviously we know every 4 years the presidential race is decided. And where's the matchup? Well, it appears Donald Trump even further ahead of Joe Biden in the battlegrounds.
Yeah, it's not just that 2-point national edge that the 538 polling average has for President Trump right now. It's throughout the battlegrounds. These are the 7 states that are most likely to determine the general election. Joe Biden won 6 out of 7. The only one on this list he didn't carry last time around was North Carolina. And you can see edges of between 3 and 10 points for Donald Trump right now in our 538 polling averages. That is significant. It doesn't necessarily mean wins. It doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't something that can change, but it is a big difference from what we saw from 4 years ago this time. This is where the 538 polling average stood on Super Tuesday 4 years ago exactly. You see, at that time, Joe Biden was leading pretty consistently in places like Michigan, Pennsylvania, even North Carolina, which he ended up losing and which is voting in the primaries tonight. So he's going to have to turn around some of the dynamics that we've seen play out in the states most likely to matter the most.
Leading 4 of the 7 battlegrounds, Joe Biden was 4 years ago on Super Tuesday. That's really incredible. Martha Raddatz, who's out traveling the country as moderator, co-anchor of this week. One of the things that you've heard from voters is that it's not just democracy, as Mary Bruce points out, saving democracy, the campaign of Joe Biden, but that he's going to have to answer voters moving forward for the 4 years that he's been president now. And have they underestimated that voters are actually asking him to answer to his own record right now, too?
That's exactly right. I mean, an incumbent has an advantage in many ways, and this race is different because you really kind of do have 2 incumbents, but voters are not in many places getting the message. Voters I talk to say, look, some of them, I think he's been a great president, but I need more from him. And they always, back to age. Almost every voter I've talked to, even those who are strong supporters of Biden, worry about that and say that. And age and enthusiasm. I think many people aren't really even paying attention. They know who's going to be running against the other. They know what's going to happen in November and that they will be the likely nominees. So I don't think they want to pay attention yet. They are looking forward and hoping the Biden supporters and the Biden campaign that they can get those voters enthused. And that will be part of how he campaigns, what he tells them, what his message is. And they also, we talk a lot about the economy. They'll say, even if they support Joe Biden, but groceries are more expensive. It's more expensive to go out to to restaurants. Gas was more expensive. That really, really matters to them. So they're watching that, they're watching everything Joe Biden says, but they are definitely testing him about age.
All right, Martha Raddatz here all night long with us as well. Martha, thank you. Let's get to former Chief of Staff to Donald Trump and former head of the RNC, ABC News contributor Reince Priebus, also with us tonight. Reince, do you see any scenario where it's not Donald Trump on the Republican side?
No, I don't. And just keep in mind, everybody, it's important to remember that the way delegates are awarded in the party, in the Republican Party, is that most of these delegates are locked in on at least the first vote at the national convention. So it really is difficult. If you remember back in 2016, people were saying we're going to free the delegates, we're going to have an open convention, and I knew the whole time that's just, but the way the rules are written, it's impossible pretty much to do that. So I think this is where we're at. It's Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and I think the general election starts now.
A lot of people at home are saying, I cannot believe this. We're doing this all over again. But in the meantime, what does Nikki Haley do? Does she endorse Donald Trump? How much longer does she stay in this?
Well, I mean, as you noted earlier, I mean, I think it's pretty remarkable and noteworthy that she's not doing anything tonight. She's not giving a speech. Look, we've got every network, every cable show on the television talking about Super Tuesday. It's a really great time to get 15 minutes of free airtime. She's not taking it. That should tell you everything you need to know. I mean, I would suspect within 48 hours, my guess is that she's going to be dropping out of this race.
All right. We'll find out if you have the answer. 48 hours, the clock is ticking. Reince Priebus with us here as well. Reince, thanks. Former head of the DNC, ABC News contributor Donna Brazile, also with us. Now, you've been in contact with the Biden campaign, of course. They want to run against Donald Trump. They have said this. But you see the polling there. You saw the battlegrounds that Rick just showed us. You see the overall election matchup. A lot of voters out there who support President Biden, Democrats out there in this country, when they see numbers like that, now that this looks like an unofficial rematch, makes them really nervous.
No, I don't think so. I think it really makes us eager to go out there and really fight for this country, the country's future. Joe Biden understands what's at stake. He understands how to bring jobs home to the American people. He knows how to deliver. And maybe what he will do this week at the State of the Union is tell the American people how he can do even more. So I tell my friends, don't fret, don't whine. Just get out there and vote.
But Donna, you have to make this about more than just saving democracy, more than Donald Trump. I heard Mary Bruce reporting that in the last 24 hours, that President Biden has said to his own campaign team, we need to go aggressively after Donald Trump. But does the president need to be out there making his own case on the southern border, on the economy, recognizing that Americans are saying, as Martha points out, that they're not feeling it?
I think President Biden can do both. He can say that I can run this country and run this campaign because I may be old, but my ideas are young. I am focused on the future. Here's what I tell my grandchildren and what I want you to tell your grandchildren. We're going to be a stronger, more prosperous, safer country with a Democratic president who is running to make sure that we can all win. He's not running to stay out of jail. He's not running to demonize anybody. He's running for the future of the United States of America.
All right, Donna Brazile, always great to have you as well. Donna, stick with us for the primetime hour. And we should point out that in California at this hour, another big story unfolding, the big Senate primary. Who will fill the seat, I should say, the late Dianne Feinstein. In California, it's actually not two separate primaries. It's actually the two top vote getters who will then face off, which could be a Democrat and a Republican, or it could be two Democrats facing each other. So let's get right to Matt Gutman. He's live in California covering a Senate race that's going to be watched by the country. Hey, Matt.
Hey, David, and that's why it's called Jungle Primary. It can be pretty tough, and it's the top two candidates who then proceed to the general election. Right now, the favorite is Adam Schiff. He's a congressman who presided over the impeachment of Donald Trump, and he's been running in what he says is a fashion he prefers, which is either running scared or running unopposed. He's kind of doing both at this moment. He's running scared in the sense that he is taking his primary opponent here, who is Katie Porter, another congresswoman from California, very, very seriously. She is a maverick, a rising star in the party, but he's attacked her by actually trying to elevate a Republican in the race. Steve Garvey, a Major League Baseball star, he has run many millions of dollars of attack ads on Garvey, thereby elevating his profile and his image to the extent that Garvey in some polls is actually leading the race. So it could either be Schiff or Garvey likely as number 1 and number 2. And that would basically mean that in the general election, he would be running unopposed because in California, Democrats outnumber Republican registered voters by a factor of 2 to 1. Now, Katie Porter's supporters said that's cynical. It's brazen. Adam Schiff supporters have a different term for it. They call it politics, David.
All right, back up, tracking this well into the night for us as well, Matt. Thank you. When we come back, we still have a lot to get to here tonight on this Super Tuesday. Results still coming in. Of course, the top issues. This is a Trump-Biden rematch again. What do both candidates need to address, from immigration, the southern border, to the economy, abortion rights after the overturning of Roe, and now the future of IVF in this country. And of course, the question many people are asking in their own living rooms, is there any chance that these things could change? Could someone jump in at the last minute? Even Michelle Obama, the former First Lady, weighing in late today, whether she would run for president. So like I said, we've got a lot to get to.
Your voice. With moderate to...
You don't make me get about my seat.
Broke the internet again.
Oh, it's coming in really fast.
Yeah, it's Verizon 5G. The network's crazy powerful. Bet you can't break that.
But I can.
Wait, what?
Beyonce breaks the internet, so can't she break Verizon? Broken?
Not even close.
No. I'm running for Beyonce of the United States. Can you hear me now?
No, Becky.
Y'all ready for Rocket B?
Still works.
Someone get me down.
Hey, CoverGirls, plant power? It's a game changer. Introducing the ultimate plant power mascara called Cleantopia. 300% extreme lush volume. Now in dramatic ultramarine black. Cleantopia mascara, ultramarine black. From CoverGirl.
Whenever news breaks.
Reporting from the earthquake in Turkey.
Here in Kentucky, no match for the tornado. Monterey Park, California, on the ground in Ukraine.
From the scene of that deadly missile strike.
ABC News Live everywhere.
Reporting from Jerusalem from Uvalde, Texas.
On the 2024 campaign trail.
Here at 10 Downing Street in London. Wherever the story is, we're going to take you there.
We're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live, streaming free everywhere.
How long do I have to wait?
So what are you waiting for? Let's go.
I love you, and I'm gonna love you forever.
Doc Altman is in critical condition.
ABC News Live coverage of Super Tuesday. You're looking at the results as they're coming in right now. Donald Trump has won 11 out of 12 states in the Republican primary so far. As you can see, Vermont also very close at this hour, the closest race. Perhaps Nikki Haley's one chance tonight to pull off a victory, but so far Donald Trump, it's been a sweep of this night. Donald Trump, a major night. In fact, the former president speaking moments ago at Mar-a-Lago. Let's take a listen.
Super Tuesday for a reason. This is a big one. And they tell me, the pundits and otherwise, that there's never been one like this. There's never been anything so conclusive. This was an amazing an amazing night, an amazing day. It's been an incredible period of time in our country's history. It's been sad in so many ways, but I think it's going to be inspiring because we're going to do something that, frankly, nobody's been able to do for a long time.
Former President Donald Trump, Mar-a-Lago, just moments ago. Let's get reaction from Rachel Scott, who is covering the Trump campaign. She's at Mar-a-Lago right now. Rachel, a very happy campaign night.
Yeah, the former president still on the stage right now taking his victory lap, David. And one person he did not mention at all so far in these remarks, Nikki Haley, the former president, clearly trying to pivot here to this general election, likely rematch with President Biden. He called him out by name. He's taking him on not only on immigration and the economy, two issues that, according to our latest polling, ABC News Ipsos polling, that shows more Americans trust former President Donald Trump on those issues than they do President Biden. Now, the former president here also calling for unity, calling for the Republican Party to rally behind him. Again, he did not mention Nikki Haley by name, but he did make a call to his supporters to rally behind him, even as he's still undergoing all of these legal troubles, David. We know that's central to his campaign message.
Supporters cheering on the former president there in the room behind you. Rachel Scott down at Mar-a-Lago. Rachel, thanks. We have word just in from President Biden himself.
And David, we've been talking about how eager the Biden campaign is to crystallize the stark differences between Biden and Trump. In this statement tonight, the president says that tonight's results leave the American people with a clear choice, saying they can choose to either keep moving forward or let Donald Trump drag us backwards. The president goes on to outline some of his accomplishments, saying all of that progress is at risk. He says that Trump is driven by grievance and grift, focused on his own revenge and retribution, not the American people, saying he will say or do anything to put himself in power.
All right, game on. Here we go.
races.
Yep, thanks, Mary. You know, we heard from voters today, immigration among their top issues, and for some of them, it is the top issue heading into November. Both President Biden and Donald Trump, both at the southern border in recent days. Maria Villarreal live tonight at the border for us. Maria, there'll be a defining issue come this November.
David, that is an understatement. And you can look no further than what we are seeing right now in Virginia. Perfect example, a state that is nowhere near the border, and yet immigration is at the top of the priority list. You know, we saw the same thing happen in Iowa and New Hampshire as well back in January. Here's the thing that concerns people most is we have not seen immigration reform since the Reagan administration. And the concern from voters right now we're hearing from is that it doesn't feel like to them that politicians even want to fix the problem. In fact, in the field, we call this, immigration issue a political piñata. Basically, both sides of the aisle are hitting this issue as hard as they possibly can. The result is votes come out right. If you're on the Republican side, you use words like migrant crime or invasion. And that really gets people angry and frustrated, and they go to the polls. And then the other side of it, on the Democratic side of it, you hear words like dignity and humanity, tugs at your heartstrings, again, making you go to the polls. But in the middle, we have voters, people that live right here in these border communities that are very concerned. What happens after November? What happens after someone gets elected? Will immigration still be at the top of the list?
Real question, Maria Villarreal at the southern border tonight. Maria, thank you. And as we've seen in the polling, immigration, the southern border has become a major issue for Democrats and Republicans in this country who recognize that Congress and whoever the president is has to work together to get something done. The other key issue we've seen just in recent abortion rights front and center again, the future of IVF after what we saw in recent days in Alabama, of course, the state's highest court there determining that frozen embryos are people. Clinics and hospitals there halting for now. Let's get right to Elizabeth Schulze, who's been covering this story for us. Elizabeth?
And David, Biden campaign is directly tying that IVF ruling here in Alabama to the end of Roe v. Wade. Vice President Harris blames Donald Trump for picking 3 U.S. Supreme Court justices who would overturn Roe and lay the groundwork for states like Alabama to impose new restrictions on reproductive rights. Alabama is one of 16 states that has banned nearly all abortions since the end of Roe. And voters here tell us that they didn't expect that IVF would become a target so quickly when Roe ended. They say that it highlights the importance of down-ballot races, of judicial picks, as well as the presidential race. Republican lawmakers here, as well as on the national level, David, including Trump, are really trying to walk a fine line here. They want to show that they support IVF, which has broad public support, while also at the same time pushing for more restrictions on abortion. David.
Elizabeth, thanks so much for your reporting there. And Mary, you have sourcing inside the campaign, and they very much say this will be on the ballot this November, and it will literally be on the ballot in some states.
Yeah, absolutely, David. I have seen abortion right advocates encouraged by a string of wins in other states, now trying to add measures to protect abortion in at least 9 states, including several key battlegrounds like Arizona, Nevada, and Florida. We have seen in previous races how this really is motivating voters to come to the polls. The Biden campaign hoping it will continue to motivate voters. Also, of course, abortion is going to be an issue to watch closely in key states that have tough restrictions like Georgia, possibly North Carolina, areas where the Biden campaign may be hoping that a backlash to this issue will also drive voters as well.
Yeah, they hope the issue will galvanize people in the battlegrounds, Martha, but it doesn't even need to be the battleground. We've seen in some very conservative states like Kansas what has happened when abortion rights is on the ballot.
And he rejected any abortion restrictions. Several states did. Kentucky, Kansas, Ohio, they rejected that. So this is a big issue. And I think obviously it's one that the Biden campaign wants to talk about a lot because they do look back at the midterms and it had it really made a difference in those midterms, according to the exit polls and pollings there. But voters I talked to as well, and women, it is such a complicated and personal issue. There was a Trump voter who I spoke to in Pennsylvania recently. She said, look, I'm Catholic. She actually sounded very much like Joe Biden. She said, I'm a Catholic, but I think women have a right to choose, so that it's complicated, and especially when they talk about limits.
And what is the exit data showing us from voters so far in this primary season on this issue?
Yeah, well, particularly in Virginia, let's take a look. You have 54% saying that they would oppose banning most or all abortions. What is interesting, though, when we're looking at California, North Carolina, and Virginia, quite often this is their 4th place issue as far as what drove them to the polls. In many cases, we're seeing 9 or 8% who said that this was top of mind for them. Of course, this is really the flip-flop of something that you're seeing as far as Democrats. This is a high priority. Republicans are saying this is 4th or 5th place.
Very interesting. And we've seen the vice president also on the campaign trails. Clearly, she's been assigned this by the Biden campaign to be out front and center on this issue. A lot more to get to when we come back here. The other major question tonight, will Donald Trump face any of these federal criminal cases before Election Day? And how does that change the equation? What did voters say today if he does? And could we see one of these trials actually right in the weeks before the election? That was Jack Smith's argument in just the last couple of days. We've got our team standing by live at the Supreme Court right after the break.
Check it out, sis. My work from anywhere. Cozy. Grab yourself a drink.
Is this dog food in your fridge?
It's not dog food. It's Fresh Pet. Real meat, real veggies.
Seems a lot of space to waste on a dog.
You know where there's a lot of space? You're all the family I need.
Fresh Pet. It's not dog food, it's food food.
Don't make me get up out my seat.
Broke the internet again.
Oh, it's coming in really fast.
Yeah, it's Verizon 5G. The network is crazy powerful. I bet you can't break that.
Bet I can.
Wait, what?
Beyonce breaks the internet, but can she break Verizon? Broken?
Not even close. No.
I'm running for Beyonce of the United States. Can you hear me now?
No breaking.
Y'all ready for Rocket B?
Still works.
Someone get me down.
My melasma made me feel really ugly. I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. I just hated taking photos.
How am I ever going to get rid of it?
Stop suffering from melasma. More than 600,000 people have regained their confidence with Muesli's prescription treatments.
In the first 2 weeks, I was amazed.
I looked at myself in the mirror and I just thought, I'm back. I've been telling everybody about it. It's been life-changing.
Find the real you again. Go to muesli.com/TV.
I think we need a bigger yard.
With our credit? This yard's fine. Go on.
Too long. But I'm not here. I found you.
Yeah. Look, Credit Karma can show us how to improve our credit for free. Then we can get a place with a bigger yard.
You hear that, Nora?
Yay.
From free credit scores to home loans and everything in between. Intimate Credit Karma. Download the app today.
Whenever news breaks.
Reporting from the earthquake in Turkey.
Here in Kentucky, no match for the tornado. Monterey Park, California, on the ground in Ukraine.
From the scene of that deadly missile strike
ABC News Live everywhere.
Reporting from Uvalde, Texas.
On the 2024 campaign trail.
Here at 10 Downing Street in London.
Wherever the story is.
We're going to take it there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live.
Streaming ABC News Live.
ABC News Live. Streaming free everywhere.
I'm a psychological criminologist training the next generation to learn how to probe the mind of a convicted murderer.
It really became more of an addiction.
Do we think he's a psychopath?
The Lesson is Murder. Now streaming only on Hulu. Take America's #1 news with you anywhere you go, anytime, free. Download the ABC News app now. Breaking news, exclusives, 24/7. There for you with one touch. The ABC News app. Download it now.
Your voice, your vote. Super Tuesday 2024 continues. Here again, David Muir.
Welcome back to our live coverage of Super Tuesday here on ABC News. Let's take you right to the map on the floor. Donald Trump actually winning a sweep of the night so far. He's won 11 of the 12 states have closed. The polls have closed. ABC News calling 11 of those states for Donald Trump. Vermont very close at this hour. And of course, 15 states total voting on this Republican primary. Donald Trump is having a very good night. On the eve of this Super Tuesday, the Supreme Court, the unanimous decision ruled that states cannot act on their own to remove Donald Trump from the ballot, saying Congress has that power. And we know this came after Colorado's highest court decided to take Donald Trump off the ballot because of what happened on January 6th. The Supreme Court said again, this is not up to the states. Now the Supreme Court, even though the justices said we should turn down the temperature across this country, it's going to be very hard when they hear arguments about Donald Trump's claim for presidential immunity in the coming weeks. The prosecution of the federal election interference case. I want to bring in Devin Dwyer, who covers the court. He is live at the court tonight. And Devin, we were talking, you'd have to go back to Bush v. Gore to see the last time the Supreme Court played such a pivotal role in a presidential election year.
That's right, David. More than 20 years ago, this is the most direct intervention in a political presidential election by this court. And its decisions, as you already said, they're already having an impact on the contours of the campaign. The unanimous decision just yesterday striking down a major legal attack on Trump's campaign was brought by both conservatives and liberals. But now a much bigger showdown is shaping up next month here when the Supreme Court will decide whether Trump can get total immunity and shut down that federal election interference trial against him from going forward. The former president says he is immune. Justices will decide whether that holds. If he is immune, David, that would shut down that prosecution in its tracks. If he does not have immunity, a trial could commence as soon as late summer or early fall, pushing right up against the election a verdict in that trial. And the extraordinary scene, as you said at the top, of a candidate sitting in a criminal trial, David.
Devin Dwyer, live at the court. Devin, appreciate it. I want to bring in our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams. So, Dan, what's the court going to do? I know you always get this question, but I'll pass it off to you. You know, Amy Coney Barrett saying we need to take down the temperature. Going to be very hard as the Supreme Court takes up this issue. Kate Shaw also with us tonight. But Dan, to you first on what you suspect the court could do here.
Well, look, the question on immunity, it's very unlikely that the court is going to rule that Donald Trump or any president has complete immunity. The question is going to be the clock. When do they decide this? Do they decide at the very end of the term? Let's even assume that they do. Okay, then how long does it take the trial that's been on hold in Washington, D.C. to then move forward? Now, the Department of Justice has taken the position, at least the special counsel has, that this 60-day rule, which is really a guideline within the Department of Justice that says that the Department of Justice shouldn't be getting involved in political issues, investigations, indictments in the 60 days before an election. Their position is, well, that's not what we're doing here. When the court would set a trial date isn't the issue of the 60 days. That would be an issue of an indictment or an investigation or a subpoena, those sorts of issues. So from their perspective, they think that the case could even begin within the 60-day period right before the election. I still find that all to be very hard to believe that that will happen.
And not to put you on the spot, you suspect the court will say he does not have complete immunity, and then it's going to be up to Judge Chuck Kin to decide when this case begins?
Correct. I think that anyone who's watching the court would be stunned if they accepted the argument that he has a complete and total immunity. Remember, there are two questions, right? Number one is, does the former president have complete immunity? And number two, was he acting in his role as president when this happened? And so the fact that there are two questions could lead to some question marks. But again, the way that the court could really punt this if they wanted to would be to send it back to the trial court to resolve certain questions. And again, then you think about the clock, right? Typically in these kinds of cases, we don't think about the clock first. In this kind of case, you have to be thinking about the clock at all times. How long is that going to take? How much of a delay will that be? Does that still leave time to have the case go before the election? And look, in theory, the issue shouldn't be when is the election. But as a practical matter, you know that the special counsel Jack Smith is thinking about that.
Dan Abrams, thanks to you. Kate Shaw, you and I have been talking. You have to look back to history to see perhaps how quickly, in terms of the court itself, they act here. If they're going to take up arguments on this in April, in just a week's time, how soon after that could we actually get a decision from the Supreme Court and where this would go from there?
Well, I think history tells us the Supreme Court can move very quickly when it wants to. And, we've talked before about 1974 in the United States versus Nixon case. Actually, just looking at the decision yesterday, restoring Trump to the ballot in Colorado and every other state, I think that's actually pretty good evidence that the court can move quickly when it wants to. That was about 3.5 weeks between the argument in that case and the decision that we got yesterday. So when the court feels the need, it can move quickly. It clearly wanted to get its decision out before Super Tuesday. So there was a definitive ruling about Trump's eligibility to be on the ballot in all the states where people are voting today. And, if the court feels a similar sense of urgency, just to give an answer to this immunity question one way or another, to allow a trial to potentially proceed, they can certainly decide this immunity question, which I think is in many respects similar than the disqualification question in yesterday's opinion, in a matter of weeks too. So it could decide the case in May. And then I think you are probably outside of this 60-day clock that Dan was just talking about. You could well see a trial late summer, very early fall, at least with a bit of a buffer before actual election day.
Again, a few seconds left. You think we could get a decision from the court, Kate, sometime in May, early June?
Absolutely. I think even mid-May is a possibility. You get into June and things get trickier with the trial calendar. But May, I think everything is possible.
And not to put you on the spot, too, but do you agree with Dan Abrams that it's likely the court will not grant the president total immunity here?
Dan and I disagree a lot, but we totally agree here. I think that the arguments that Trump is advancing here, I think, are difficult to square with our constitutional tradition, which just says really no person is above the law. That's essentially what Trump is asking the court to grant him, essentially, a complete immunity from ordinary criminal process. And I don't see a majority of the court, I'm not sure about even more than one or two justices, adopting that argument.
A moment of unity with our legal team here, too, as well. Kate Shaw, Dan Abrams, our thanks to you. Real quick before we go to the break, because this, again, not to get ahead of ourselves, but if this were to go to trial, if there was a conviction, some voters have indicated that that would change the way they vote.
Of course, Nikki Haley has said all along, I'm staying in this with those 40% of voters who don't want Donald Trump, and they have some strong feelings about if he were to get convicted. Look at Virginia coming in hot. 87% of Nikki Haley voters say that Trump is not fit to be president if he's convicted. Just ticking through here. North Carolina, more of the same. 79% say he's not fit. Take a look at California with a similar number. 71% say he's not fit if convicted. And if we just look at the aggregate of 6 states that we know so far, if you throw in Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, 79% say if convicted, again, these are Nikki Haley voters, they don't think Donald Trump is fit.
Which is why a huge strategy of Donald Trump, the campaign, is to push this timeline as best they can to get it
out the clock.
Pushed out beyond the election. Lindsay, our thanks to you. We got a lot more ahead here. When we come back here, a lot of attention, Martha mentioned earlier, on age in this race, really for both candidates. And the question that's being asked across this country, is there any time at this point for anyone else to step into the race, even perhaps last minute around convention time? People have talked about the former First Lady, Michelle Obama. Well, she weighed in on this whole idea today, whether or not she could run for president. We'll have that in a moment.
Fiverr. Find the right freelance service right away. So that's how they're growing so fast.
Yeah,
I imagine they had way more employees than we do.
Look at the number of projects.
Look at that frozen yogurt tap.
Digital marketing, AI experts, web design.
Raspberry mocha swirl. Unbelievable.
Should we try that?
I wish. Can't really digest dairy.
Grow your business with freelancers. Fiverr.
It's like any other day. Our friends invited us to come see one of their kids playing this Little League baseball game. And that was the last time I saw her.
Anyone who abducts a child,
You're probably twisted beyond untwisting. We have 8,300 leads in her case.
it's like a jigsaw puzzle.
People don't understand how you can keep fighting. But Morgan is worth fighting for.
This is like the new chapter. This is fire. They got just sneakers. These sneakers tell stories.
Who are these guys?
Wow, I've never seen anything like this before in my life. You talk about grills? Well, this is out.
This can actually change the game.
This is ABC News Live Prime.
Thanks so much for streaming with us.
Live reporting, breaking news, exclusives, award-winning, powerful, eye-opening. ABC News Live Prime with Lindsay Davis. Streaming weeknights.
How long do I have to wait?
So what are you waiting for? Let's go.
Times on trouble.
Which one of you am I following?
I'm truly stunned that you still work here. I love you, and I'm gonna love you forever.
Vodka tonic, sir.
We need to talk about what happened.
Dr. Altman is in critical condition.
911, what's your emergency?
The job is a whirlwind. When there's disaster to deal with, who are we?
My wife, where is she? Saving the ship.
911 comes to ABC, March 14th.
The white people of this nation are sick and tired.
My mission was to go inside the KKK for the FBI.
The KKK wanted to cut my son in pieces.
If it came out that Joe was working with the FBI,
You pay with your blood.
how do you go from a cross burning at night to having breakfast with your kids the next morning?
Can't quit. That's not an option.
Grand Nighthawk, infiltrating the KKK. Now streaming only on Hulu.
I was murdered, buried my killer's darkest secrets.
For me, this was the end. For the cops solving my murder, it was just the beginning. This is me.
This is me hereafter.
Now streaming only on Hulu.
Welcome back, ABC News Live coverage of Super Tuesday. This is the primary see so far. Take a look at the wall right now. You can see Donald Trump, 739 estimated delegates so far this primary season, vastly helped by tonight. Nikki Haley with 53 estimated delegates, about 10 so far tonight. You look at the very top of that graphic that you see, that Donald Trump needs 1,215 delegates to clinch the nomination, which takes us right back over to Rick Klein at the board. When does he clinch, given the pace of the math so far?
Yeah, look, there's still a lot of delegates in play tonight, and Donald Trump is positioned well to get most of them. Even if he loses Vermont, which seems likely right now, he's going to win California almost certainly. He'll probably be at around 1,000 to 1,100 plus delegates by the end of the night, which puts him in prime position to clinch this nomination maybe as soon as next week. If you look at what's coming up, fast forward to March 12th, these are the delegates in play in Mississippi, in Washington State, and Georgia, the state that broke him in the general election and, of course, led to criminal charges ultimately. Could be one of the states that puts him over the top as soon as next week, if not next week, almost certainly the week after, even if Haley stays in the race.
So not tonight, but very likely next week or the week after.
That's exactly right.
All
He's
right.
on the precipice.
What a remarkable turnaround, John Carl, for a former president who left office having lost to Joe Biden. The events of January 6th, there was a lot of attention, not only in this country, but around the world. And he's had a sweep tonight and really an incredible primary season so far.
As one of top advisors said to me a while back it'd be the greatest comeback since the Roman leader Cincinnatus. I don't, it's a long time ago. I mean, this is unbelievable when you think that he left the White House in January of 2021 in disgrace. He was a pariah to most of the leaders in his party. He was then impeached. He then, started to reassert himself slowly and inserted himself in the 2022 elections. Republicans lost all over the map in 2022, vastly underperforming. Those losses were blamed on Donald Trump. He announced his campaign, David, on November 15th of 2022 at Mar-a-Lago. I was there. Very few other Republican leaders were there. He had no real endorsements. The first polls in late 2022, early last year, actually showed DeSantis beating him. And he has made this comeback. And it's remarkable because it is a comeback that has happened coinciding with 4 criminal indictments, 91 counts. All that has happened, Republicans have come back and chosen him decisively. It's a remarkable story.
Remarkable also because it's happening at a time when we've seen the national polling that voters really don't want either one of these men. They don't want this rematch in this country.
Look, we're headed to a rematch that the country doesn't want. And frankly, you heard Nikki Haley say this a lot in recent weeks, but it's true. 70% of the country says they don't want this rematch. We're barreling towards a Biden-Trump rematch. It's where we are. But I have to say, this is a very big night for him. He's not clinching tonight, but he is effectively the presumptive nominee following what has happened here tonight. But he has dominated Republican primaries. He dominated them in 2022 as well, his candidates. He has lost every general election campaign since that one that he won in 2016. So now we'll see. He's dominated the Republicans. Where is he going to lead the Republicans and the country to in November?
Yeah, that's the question for him. The question for President Biden is how does he address the age issue, which has become a significant issue for him? And also this question we were getting at with John here just a moment ago, the country doesn't want really this rematch at all, either one of these candidates. It's why the conversation leads to Michelle Obama and other people. It appears the former First Lady had had enough of that talk.
Yeah, she's shutting that one down. We have seen this before, the speculation, the rumors that perhaps Michelle Obama will get in. Her team says not going to happen. She fully supports the Biden-Harris ticket. She'll be happy to be a surrogate out there on the trail. But it does speak to this real discontent. Look, the fact of the matter is a lot of Democrats wish Joe Biden wasn't running again, but he is. And the campaign is really arguing that right now, is a time to accept that reality and move forward. But they are certainly exasperated and very frustrated by this continued focus on the president's age. They understand it. They're trying to tackle it. They have a messaging issue with it. They know they need to do more. And I think when they look at the big picture, yes, Joe Biden is the oldest president in American history. He'd be 82 on Election Day. Donald Trump, not that much younger. But I think the big picture they argue is when they stack, and they hope what will happen, when they stack Joe Biden's accomplishments against a twice impeached, defeated former president facing 91 felony counts, who's been found guilty of sexual assault and financial fraud, that ultimately, that if it comes down to that, if they can remind voters of his record and Donald Trump's record and what he stands for, the voters will back Joe Biden once again.
That's the strategy. The reality, though, what do voters say about age?
Donald Trump voters, people say all kinds of things about them, but one thing that stands true is they are loyal. Donald Trump, 77 years old, just 4 years younger than Joe Biden. But take a look at these Trump voters in Virginia. 96% say Donald Trump, he's mentally fit to be president. On the flip side, when you look at just a few days ago, there was a New York Times CNN poll where you have Biden voters who are a little more questionable. 61% believe that Biden may be too old to be effective as a president. So really a total opposite there.
And Martha Reddish, you hear this from President Biden's supporters across the country who went out in these primaries to support him, even though he's the incumbent, didn't need it, but went out to show their support, recognizing that age is an issue.
It clearly is an issue. And Joe Biden, look, he just had a physical, right? The White House released that. He does have a stiff gait. You talk to people in the White House all the time. I talk to people in the White House who say in meetings, he's coherent, he's fine. But you get these moments with Joe Biden, and they dominate news cycles. They do. They especially dominate them in conservative media, and people look at that. And in some ways, when they see those moments, it validates their own suspicions. Like, he is old. I just saw that moment. I was thinking it was kind of like Dan Quayle, the vice president, who people thought maybe he's not so smart. And then he misspelled potato, which was such a little tiny thing. But when you get something that validates your own suspicions, when they see Joe Biden forget things, when they see him walking, then that validates that. And that's the problem. And the problem he can do, none of us can do anything about.
And Dan Quayle's wondering, really? Bring a potato?
Yeah.
Martha, thanks.
Sorry about that.
We've got more of our Super Tuesday coverage coming up here in a moment. And one key question in all these polls that show them neck and neck right now, President Biden, Donald Trump, who are the 7 to 8% undecided? And will they decide this election? We'll ask that on table here in a moment.
Who says you can't get everything you want? Like going for bold without going broke. And staying true to your taste while staying on budget. Who says rising costs means lowering the bar? Settling? No need. Get the brands you want, the prices you want, whenever you want. TJ Maxx, where you can always afford to be you to the max.
Fiverr. Find the right freelance service right away. So that's how they're growing so fast.
Yeah, I imagine they had way more employees than we do.
I mean, look at the number of projects.
Look at that frozen yogurt tab.
Digital marketing, AI experts, web design.
Raspberry mocha swirl. Unbelievable.
Should we try that?
I wish. I can't really digest dairy.
Grow your business with freelancers. Fiverr.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
We're part of an operation.
Is this our combat operations?
We're approaching the gate. Militants came in from different directions. Nuclear reactor. We have a couple loaded and ready to go. The house is destroyed, but the flag.
Okay.
How important it made USA. Great work.
Ismail?
David. I'm David Muir.
I know you are.
You
Watch
do?
you every night.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.
Last week, my husband, he booked us on a cruise. I'm terrified.
I'm sure you'll be fine.
I'm looking for Captain Nash and his wife, but I can't find their cruise ship.
Dispatch all emergency rescue units. Flying into a hurricane.
Go back, that's it!
911 comes to ABC Thursday, March 14th and stream on Hulu.
I am Jimmy Kimmel, and I am hosting the Oscars 1 hour earlier this year. That's 7 Eastern, 4 Pacific. And if you're on Mountain Time, I don't know what to tell you. Climb.
Jimmy Kimmel hosts the Oscars, Sunday, March 10th on ABC.
I feel like the weight of the world is on my shoulders. I've seen a lot. I've been through a lot without for having a chance to share my side of the story.
When we think of psychopaths, we often think about this Hannibal Lecter who commits serial murder.
Forgot my suit. My suit wasn't tailored in time.
But actually, that is one of the most rare types of psychopaths.
I'm sorry.
I'm a psychological criminologist training the next generation to learn how to probe the mind of a convicted murderer.
It really became more of an addiction.
The one constant is that need for power and control.
The lesson is murder.
Do we think he's a psychopath?
Now streaming only on Hulu. Is America's most watched newscast.
Back live with our Super Tuesday coverage, right to the numbers, and you can see it's been a very strong night for Donald Trump. He's now within a week or two of clinching the math he needs for the nomination. Rick Klein, very tight race between President Biden and Donald Trump already, 2 to 4 points in the national polls between them. This might all come down to the 7-8% of undecideds in this country.
It's basically a tied race with the general election starting now, and those 7 or 8 percentage points you're talking about, there are people talk about double haters. They dislike both candidates. They are on the sidelines for now. Of course, the effort will be to get them back.
All about the independents and moderates. I'm David Muir. Thanks for watching GMA first thing in the morning, and I'll see you for World News Tonight tomorrow. Good night.
Right now, there's just so much happening in our world.
All right, you're watching ABC News Live, Your Voice, Your Vote, Super Tuesday edition. I'm Terry Moran taking over from David. Thanks very much for streaming with us. There's just a huge victory for former President Donald Trump tonight. He tallied win after win over his challenger, Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina. Let's take a look at the delegate count there. You can see it's just a smashing victory. Trump far ahead of his competitor and disappearing into the distance. For the Democrats, well, Joe Biden's got all the delegates against his one declared candidate, Dean Phillips, member of Congress from Minnesota. Just one state right now tonight stands in the way of Donald Trump's total sweep of the 15 states voting today. It's still too close to call there in Vermont. ABC News projects that Donald Trump will win the California Republican primary based on an analysis of the exit poll, and ABC News also projects that Joe Biden will win the California Democratic primary based on the analysis of the exit poll there. No real surprises. In fact, no surprise at all. Donald Trump already took the stage not long ago to celebrate and look ahead to the campaign against Joe Biden. Take a listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
And they tell me, the pundits and otherwise, that there's never been one like this. There's never been anything so conclusive. This was an amazing night, an amazing day. It's been an incredible period of time in our country's history. It's been sad in so many ways, but I think it's going to be inspiring because we're going to do something that, frankly, nobody's been able to do for a long time. We've watched our country take a great beating over the last 3 years. And nobody thought a thing like this would be possible. We wouldn't have Russia attacking Ukraine. We wouldn't have Israel being attacked. Iran, as you know, was broke. When I was running things, they were broke. They didn't have money for Hamas. They didn't have money for Hezbollah. We had no inflation. Inflation is destroying the middle class. It's destroying everything. Inflation, if you look back over the history, hundreds of years back, it's called inflation. It's called a country buster. And that's what it's doing to our country. What's happened with inflation has been unbelievable. A lot of people say, a lot of experts have said the stock market's the only thing that's doing well, and that's doing well because our poll numbers are so much higher than Joe Biden's. It's sad to see what's happening to our cities. Our cities are being overrun with migrant crime, and that's Biden migrant crime. But it's a new category of crime, and it's violent. They'll stand in the middle of a street and have fistfights with police officers, and if they did that in their countries from where they came, they'd be killed instantly. They wouldn't do that. So the world is laughing at us, the world is taking advantage of us, and we want to have unity, and we're going to have unity, and it's going to happen very quickly. And I've been saying lately, success will bring unity to our country, and it happened before. We had the best economy our country's ever had, and people were calling me that I would have said will never happen. It'll never happen. They wanted to get together African American, Asian American, Hispanic American, women, men, people with diplomas from the best schools in the world, and people that didn't graduate from high school. Every single group was doing better than ever before. So this has been a day that we've been waiting for. I want to thank my family for being here. It's a great family. I have a great family. They've had it very easy since I decided to run for politics. They say, thanks a lot, Dad. We appreciate it. I read an article yesterday where it said this is one of the finest run campaigns that anybody has ever seen. That's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. It's really a statement. And we have no choice because November 5th is right around the corner. November 5th is going to go down as the single most important day in the history of our country.
All right, there's Donald Trump's victory lap And he certainly deserved it. And you're looking there right at the general election, right? No surprise. It's a rerun. And in some ways, the campaign nobody wanted. There's a lot of dissatisfaction in the country. Polls show about the general election campaign between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump in November. But it looks like that's what we've got. ABC News projects that Joe Biden will win the Utah and California Democratic primaries based on an analysis of the vote, with Marianne Williams getting a few points there. The polls have just closed in those western states. Alaska closes in about 30 minutes. We'll keep you updated on that. California results officially in now. So let's head to ABC's Matt Gutman. He's in the Golden State for us, as so often, and so often around the world as well. Matt, California, your base there. No big surprises there, it seems. What do you make of the results tonight?
California is a big blue state, Terry. 20 million registered Democrats, 10+ million registered Republicans. Obviously, it leans heavily towards Democrats. President Biden taking 424 delegates, 70 super delegates. It's a big win. Everybody knew it was going to happen. But I got to tell you, we just had something happen right in front of the camera, to the side of the camera, moments ago. Somebody came highly enthusiastic, a voter, saying, look, the ballot boxes were so full, they're actually overflowing. Notice that there are people behind us waiting in line. And we just started chatting with the gentleman. And I asked him, as I typically do, any major political issues that you're interested in, something that's on your mind. He said, you know what? Yeah. Gaza, Israel, Gaza. He said, my son came home and he said, we have to do a protest vote. So there are 4 top candidates for the Senate seat here, the one that Dianne Feinstein had for 30 years, Terry. The person who's running in 4th place right now is Congresswoman Barbara Lee. And this man said that he and his son convinced him to vote for Barbara Lee as a protest vote because of President Biden's and Adam Schiff's stance and Katie Porter's, and basically the bulk of Democratic Party's stance on the Israel-Gaza issue. They say the United States is not nearly tough enough on Israel, and that what's happening in Gaza is a travesty and something needs to be done, and people need to hear about it. I was shocked to the degree that it actually affected someone's vote in the primary, Terry. So it's definitely something to look forward to in the coming months and in the elections.
That's really significant. You've been over there covering that so long. I'll get back in just a second, Matt. We do want to say that ABC News now projects that Nikki Haley has won the state of Vermont, defeated Donald Trump, the only state so far in this 15-state Super Tuesday voting that she has won. There you go, 50% of the vote. She beats Donald Trump in the state of Vermont. She's going to pick up some delegates, and delegates count. But right now, Donald Trump way ahead in every way. He's not going to like that, though. He's thin-skinned about stuff like that. Matt, let me get back to you there in California. This California Senate race. Talk a little bit about Adam Schiff and Steve Garvey, the former baseball player, and Katie Porter, who's also in this race. How is that working out, given the fact that it's 2 Democrats and 1 Republican in the California primary? That's the way it's organized, as an open primary. What do you make of what you're seeing tonight in that race?
So this was the seat that was held by Dianne Feinstein, Terry, for 30 years, right? This is like, if you win the seat, it's like getting tenure if you're a college professor. It's a big deal. You're probably going to be in the seat for quite a long time. It's hard to lose as a Democratic senatorial incumbent in California right now. And so the front runner at this point, and who has been for a while now, he's backing from very powerful Democrats like Nancy Pelosi and others, has been Adam Schiff. Behind him is Katie Porter, who is this rising star in the Democratic Party. She flipped the 47th congressional seat in Orange County in 2018. We were on hand for that. It was a big deal, and she's held on to it. She's had to give up her seat in order to run in this race. So she's really, because the race in California for all of the primaries is called a jungle primary. So the top 2 candidates, regardless of party, end up going to the general elections. And so Schiff said basically in his mind that he would prefer going up against a Republican than Katie Porter. So what he essentially did, or people say he did, is he started attacking a pretty much unknown Republican figure here, Steve Garvey, former Major League Baseball player, pretty big star, but not known as a politician, and attacking him with many, many millions of dollars worth of TV ads. by elevating his image and his profile to the extent that right now Steve Garvey is leading in some polls over Schiff himself. Schiff doesn't care. As long as he's top 2 or 1, he's going to take the election in November. So all he needs is to be number 2. He doesn't have to beat Katie Porter. He just needs a Republican to go up against. Katie Porter's team said this is brazen, this is cynical, this is foul play. But Adam Schiff supporters have called it something else. They've called it very politics.
Politics. It's exactly what it is. That is quite a maneuver, but it's not like it's going to look good if he loses to Steve Garvey in California. No. Matt Gutman.
Very unlikely in this state.
All right. Well, Matt Gutman, thanks very much. Appreciate it. We go now to ABC senior reporter Catherine Falder. She's in Florida, where Donald Trump is. And I want to ask you about what ABC News has just projected, Catherine. That Nikki Haley has won the Vermont Republican primary based on an analysis of the vote. What does that mean, if anything, to the Trump team and to Trump himself, who tends not to like losing? And is he going to call the vote rigged up there?
Well, you kind of called it there, Terry, when you were talking about this just moments ago, that even though it's essentially been a clean sweep for Donald Trump, he certainly isn't going to like losing that state. Who knows ultimately what he will say, but talking to sources close to Trump and those who were at least watching the vote come in with Trump, this is something that they had their eye on since the very beginning of the night. Vermont. This is something his campaign aide watching closely, that Trump was watching closely. I'm told he was watching the results come in the residents at Mar-a-Lago before making his way down, at least behind the scenes, to mingle with donors and campaign staff and elected officials. So we'll have to see what he says about that. But what's clear from his remarks, Terry, that he gave moments ago here at Mar-a-Lago, is that he didn't mention Haley once by name. He has been not mentioning her lately, trying to take the attention off of her towards the general election. So that's at least what his campaign aides are telling him, to focus on the general election. Who knows ultimately what Haley's next steps are and what she ultimately says if this change of calculus with this win. But certainly Vermont is a state that the Trump campaign and Trump himself were watching closely.
All right, Catherine, if I can draw on all the reporting that you're doing on the various Trump trials and legal cases, you know, so far he's been using that to his political advantage. But I want to talk about money. It takes a lot of money to run for president, and Trump is spending a lot legally. How does the money factor in his legal cases, including the fines and the penalties that's been assigned by juries and judges, how does that play into his ability to raise money to fund a presidential campaign against an incumbent president?
Well, it's a great question. And of course, all of those judgments that ultimately he may have to pay, where is he going to get that money? There's questions about how liquid Trump really is. But it's fascinating on the donor front as it relates to the legal bills. We know he's paid millions and millions of dollars in his legal bills. Some of those donors are, quite frankly, wondering where their money is going. I know that there were at least a couple Trump lawyers over at Mar-a-Lago today who were mingling with donors, perhaps to reassure them that their money was going somewhere good, if you will. But we know, and as we've been reporting, that a lot of that money that's going to Trump's super PAC, millions and millions and millions of dollars, is being paid to these lawyers, Terry, who we see in federal court almost weekly at this point, whether it be in this state, in Washington, D.C., and Georgia, in New York. So certainly the financial burden of this, whether it be money that Trump has to pay, whether it be his legal fees that he will continue to pay, it's certainly weighing on him, and something that's at least the front of his mind as he moves this campaign forward into the general election.
Absolutely. That is going to be a challenge going forward. Catherine Falder, thanks very much reporting on the Trump campaign down there in Florida. And now let's go to our Alex Perche. Alex has been covering Nikki Haley, and she got her first win tonight, Alex. Vermont, the Green Mountain State. Any word on a reaction from her campaign on that?
So we've reached out to our campaign, and so far it's been mum on that end. But look, I mean, we know that they were trying to build momentum from that historic win in D.C., right? She was the first female Republican candidate to win a primary or a caucus cover, and so now she has Vermont under her belt. And look, Nikki Haley coming into Super Tuesday had said she wants to continue forward past this date, but it depends on how competitive they are in this race. Now, Terry, I guess like the question is, I mean, how do you define competitive? Is it having a win like this win in Vermont? Is it something else? Because clearly she still has a significant gap between her and former President Trump whenever it comes to delegates. But something that I want to highlight, and we got some exit poll data as Trump is running away with this. But from all of the states that we have exit poll data, save North Carolina, I think that's still being factored in, 79% of these Haley voters, they're unsatisfied with Trump as a nominee. 79% also say they feel Trump is unfit if he's convicted. And then 83% say they believe that Biden was legitimately elected. And the reason that I bring that up is because we talk about, we've heard so much about this unity of the party, the need for this party to kind of come together. Well, those are some really critical issues that they're going to have to reckon with. And certainly, it's something that the former president, if he's going to go on and win this nomination, is going to have to address to try to bring some of those voters under the tent. And it seems as though, a lot of them are anything Trump's right now.
Hard for Donald Trump to acknowledge anything but that the 2020 election was stolen. If that's a sticking point for some of those Haley voters, that's going to be a problem for him. And I wonder, she's running such a quixotic campaign here, Alex. She's not going to win. What's the end game for her here?
Well, I certainly think that she's hoping for a change in the winds, right? As it's brought up before. You got to play the game, but also I think this is a statement campaign, right? I mean, you have 40% of the votes here in South Carolina primary that go her way. Well, again, that's 40% that if the former president wants to be competitive in November, he's going to have to figure out a way to woo at least a large swath of those over. And as Nikki Haley is facing increasing pressure to bow out of this race, she was actually peppered about it on cable news earlier today. One of the things that she's been pressured to do is endorse him quickly. Well, she's holding out on that notion. She wanted to see how the day goes, but also kind of hinted that an endorsement from her might not be something that even comes for months from now. And also kind of noted that she didn't think that he would necessarily endorse her if the tables were reversed. So it's clear to me that she understands that there is a significant population of Republicans that the former president needs if he wants to be successful in November. And right now, she's playing those cards.
Yeah, she might have some leverage there. And just as a footnote, I never really liked the reporter's tradition of hollering at candidates. When are you going to drop out? Not quite sure why we do that. But Alex, you don't? I know. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. All right, Jay O'Brien joins us now. Jay, covering politics, campaign, Congress, all that stuff. Let's talk about Nikki Haley and Vermont.
Yeah.
She won Vermont.
It's a pickup. It's a winning of a state. There is significance in that. Firstly, if Nikki Haley wins 5 states, she has D.C., Vermont, she can have her name submitted at the GOP convention, and you can have kind of a more brokered convention. Obviously, Donald Trump is beating her handily in the delegate count, but you get more TV time with your name in the convention that can be officially offered as a candidate, things of that nature. So there is a dollars and cents element to this. Also, it does show momentum, right? It is a pickup.
Wait, that momentum.
It does show momentum. It is a pickup. It is a win in a night when she was expected to get trounced every step of the way. But it also demonstrates 2 things. One, we're talking about one win of one state when you have 15 states up for grabs for Republicans and Donald Trump winning handily in every single other of those states. Secondly, it starts this other question that you and I have been having, which is what happens to the Nikki Haley voter? Some of those Republicans in Vermont who maybe don't like Donald Trump, who cast a ballot for Nikki Haley. I met 2 Nikki Haley voters in South Carolina during that primary, where she lost by double digits in that state.
Where she was governor.
Yeah, where she was governor. She lost by double digits there, 60-40. But I met 2 women who said they voted for Trump 2016, they voted for Trump in 2020. They will never vote for him again, they said. Now, that's in the middle of a primary. But the question becomes for Donald Trump, what kind of outreach is he doing to those voters, a lot of whom are suburban women, to try to get them back in the fold if and when he becomes the eventual nominee? That's a question he hasn't really answered yet.
Yeah, well, one thing, saying that winning one of 15 states and it's Vermont, it's momentum, is like saying a boxer that gets up off the canvas at the 8 count has momentum rather than just lying down and take the knockout. But what Trump is doing is saying, moderates, get out. I don't want you.
He said that to Nikki Haley voters. Remember, he said if you're a Nikki Haley voter, you're banned from the MAGA movement. Nikki Haley started to fundraise off there, right? She was selling shirts that said banned. I saw a few of them at a few of her events when I was there in South Carolina. So the question becomes, is Donald Trump capable? Is Donald Trump interested in extending an olive branch to those moderate Republicans? Because remember, we're not playing with a ton of votes here. Just a couple 100,000 votes in some key states is what put Joe Biden in the Oval Office. And so you really can't afford, if you're looking at this matchup again, if the numbers look anything like 2020, and this is a much different election, but if the numbers look anything like 2020, you can't afford to lose a lot of voters here. And so does he have the capacity to have that olive branch and make it to Democrats? I can tell you one more thing, forgive my screed, but I've been talking to some Democratic strategists tonight, and they're banking on the fact that he doesn't. I've talked to several Democratic strategists, some of whom are in swing states, some of whom are in safe Democratic states, but all of whom are targeting those suburban women voters. They're doing focus groups with them. They're polling them. And they believe that Trump, in their polling and in their focus group data, has not done enough to reach out to them as of right now.
Biden, however, does have his record now, and a lot of those voters don't like what they've experienced under Joe Biden. Jay O'Brien, thanks very much. Stick around. We'll be back to you. Immigration is a huge issue in this country today. Donald Trump made sure to highlight the crisis at the border in his speech tonight. He hammered on a policy area that has really been his calling card since he came into politics, since he came down that escalator. And trying to connect with Republicans across the country. Maria Villarreal is on the ground for us, as she so often is on the border in El Paso, Texas. Maria, why or how well do you think Donald Trump is doing on the immigration issue? Not in terms of policy, but he's amped up the anger, portraying every person who comes across the border as a danger to the United States. It's a darker, if possible, it's a darker campaign on this issue than it was in 2016 and 2020.
You know, Terry, and it's working, honestly. And you can look no further than what the Biden administration is starting to do with their messaging. You know, when they first ran their campaign, they ran on humanity and giving people dignity as they were coming to the border. That has considerably changed over the last 2 years, to the point where we're actually seeing, you know, the president talk about this executive order that would tighten asylum restrictions along the border. So clearly, if he uses those words like humanity and dignity, Republicans pounce on that. And they talk about how he is soft on immigration, he is soft on border security, and that this is open border policies. So for him, he has to change. And so back to your point, you know, is he winning when it comes to, is Trump winning when it comes to this particular issue? Absolutely. His messaging is spot on when it comes to playing on the fears, the voters' fears. I mean, look no further than what happened in Virginia tonight. I mean, this is a state that is nowhere near the southern border, and yet immigration is at the top of their priority list. But we saw the same thing happen in Iowa and New Hampshire back in January. Clearly, voters are voting with their fears at the top of their brain. Could this happen in my backyard? What we are seeing in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles.
Great point. Maria, one more for you. I want to ask about the policies that Trump says he'll put in place. This mass deportation, unlike anything seen in the United States in 70 years. His aides are talking about mass detention camps on military bases, getting the military involved, that everybody goes. It would be unlike anything the country has ever seen. You know, and he says because it's, you know, there's so many dangerous people coming across our border. You see these people so often in your reporting. First, answer that, and then what would that Trump operation look like?
Well, you know, just to point out, we heard Trump talk in his speech tonight about migrant crime and how this was a new crime category. And just to clarify, there is no such thing as a migrant crime, violent crime category. I mean, when we're talking about violent crimes, Terry, you know, this is murder, robbery, assault. We can't just create a new category so that it fits the campaign. So that's first clarification here. But then moving forward, right, is it possible that we could see this being an indicator of what these communities have to deal with in the future? Absolutely. And is it something that he is going to continue to hammer on? Absolutely. I think the only thing we have to look at is what you just pointed out. What is the strategy? What is the plan? Can he deport all those people? Absolutely not. There's not enough funding to do that. There are not processes in place right now for ICE to get that in order. Would he be able to bring back the Remain in Mexico policy? Probably not. It would get caught once again in the judicial system. So I think what he is doing is hoping that voters don't understand some of the key terms that he is using in his campaign. Whether it's deportation, which sounds simple enough, but the process isn't, or whether he talks about, Remain in Mexico policies. Again, he's hoping that people don't truly understand the nuts and bolts of immigration. What he is hoping is that they see the scary images coming across these borders and the influxes and the big groups, and that will push people to the polls.
Maria Villarreal, you always bring such a dose of reality and reporting on this issue. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Maria. So let's move now to our reporter in Colorado. Mola Lenghi is in Colorado, where polls just closed. And Mola, you're there in part because of what the U.S. Supreme Court did yesterday, reversed the Colorado Supreme Court decision to keep Donald Trump off the state's Republican ballot, citing his alleged participation in an insurrection on January 6th and disqualification under the 14th Amendment. So did that Supreme Court, what the Supreme Court did, allow him to appear on the ballot, or any of the Supreme Court? Was it the talk in Colorado? Did it sway voters at all, do you think?
Well, Terry, it's interesting. A lot of people had opinions about it, but it didn't appear to have a significant impact. Obviously, if you ask most Democrats, most undecided voters who were not supportive of Donald Trump, even some Republicans who do not support Donald Trump here, they were certainly, some of them were certainly disappointed in that Supreme Court ruling yesterday. And those who do support Donald Trump obviously view it as a victory. And what it really did was provide some clarity for a lot of those Trump supporters that Donald Trump would in fact be on the ballot, that their votes would in fact count, their votes for him, that their voices would be heard. After that initial Colorado Supreme Court ruling, there was some confusion here on the ground as to whether that would be true, whether Trump would ultimately end up on the ballot. So it did provide some clarity for folks who did show up at polling locations today. But it's worth noting, Terry, that 98% of Colorado primary voters vote by mail. 98% vote by mail. So you have to imagine that a lot of these decisions as to who they were voting for were made prior to yesterday's Supreme Court ruling. These are ballots, the mail-in ballots that would have had to have been filled out and mailed in prior to yesterday's Supreme Court ruling. But ultimately, as you know, Donald Trump was expected to win the Republican presidential nomination here in Colorado coming into tonight. Joe Biden was expected to win the Democratic presidential nomination coming into tonight. Both were expected to do so comfortably, and based on our ABC News projections, both did. So it doesn't appear that there was any significant impact by yesterday's Supreme Court ruling, Terry.
And Mola, thank you for that, Mola. I do want to ask about, you just said something extraordinary. 98% were mail-in ballots, and they would have arrived. Voters would have been voting for a candidate who may not have been lawfully on the ballot had the Supreme Court gone the other way. There wasn't a great chance of that. But I wonder, given the size of that mail-in vote, do you get the sense there that people are distrusting of mail-in votes, as they have been in other states, partly because of the way Donald Trump attacked the 2020 election? Or is this business as usual in Colorado?
At least this cycle appears to, at the moment, be business as usual based on what we're hearing. 98%, a significant number. But, it's also worth noting that turnout statewide was about 30%. Again, this is a primary election, primary vote, where turnout nationwide typically is lower, and that was the case here. It doesn't seem that all trust is lost in that process, Terry.
All right, Mola Lenghi, thank you very much. in Colorado for us. Appreciate it. There's still much more to get to here on the ABC News Live. Coming up, we're going to bring you more on this big night in politics and how the IVF debate influenced Alabama voters tonight. That's coming up next.
Daisy is creamy, pure natural cottage cheese. Only Daisy cottage cheese will do.
Something's coming.
Something powerful.
Something suspect.
Something sexy.
Something amazing.
Everything I need is right here.
Community.
Family danger. Murder.
This world has so much to offer.
Are you ready?
You can have it all with the Disney Bundle. The Boy Scouts knew they had a problem.
Parents gave the Boy Scouts the most valuable thing they had, their children. And they told parents, you can trust us.
They're unbelievably heartbreaking stories. So many of them are haunted by who they would have become if this never happened to them.
This is about how to move from victim to survivor.
When the detective says he confessed to abuse, I no longer had to prove to people that I was abused. I was free.
In here, you can expect to find crystal clear audio, expansive display space, and more comfort for everyone. But we still left room for all the unexpected things you'll find out here. The new 2024 Grand Cherokee lineup. Jeep, there's only one.
During the Jeep Celebration event, get the 2024 Jeep Grand Cherokee starting at $38,290 MSRP. Visit Jeep.com for details.
I feel like the weight of the world is on my shoulders. I've seen a lot. I've been through a lot without ever having a chance to share my side of the story.
When we think of psychopaths, we often think of this Hannibal Lecter who commits serial murder.
I forgot my suit. My suit wasn't tailored in time.
But actually, that is one of the most rare types of psychopaths.
Sorry.
I'm a psychological criminologist training the next generation to learn how to probe the mind of a convicted murderer.
It really became more of an addiction.
The one constant is that need for power and control.
The lesson is murder.
Do you think he's a psychopath?
Now streaming only on Hulu.
All right, welcome back to ABC News Live. And Lindsay Davis, ABC News Live Prime anchor, is back with us at the big board and the big desk up in New York. Lindsay?
The big desk, Terry, thank you so much for holding that big desk down for us from D.C. And I'd like to bring in 538's Galen Drupe, who's taking a look at the big picture here. He joins us now. Galen, what can tonight's results tell us about the general election, if anything?
Yeah, that's a really important question, Lindsay. Because the primaries are not competitive at this point, I think a lot of folks want to look at the results from tonight as some indication of how things will turn out in November. And I just want to caution folks up front that in a primary election like what we're seeing tonight, just to give you an example, in Michigan, which happened last week, where all of the votes have already been tallied, there was a 22% turnout of registered voters in the state in Michigan. Last time they voted in a presidential election in 2020, more than 70% of registered voters turned out to vote. So we're talking about wildly different electorates between the kinds of people who are turning out tonight and the kinds of people who are going to turn out in November 2024. And what differentiates the folks who turned out tonight from that much bigger electorate are these folks are a lot more politically engaged, they're a lot more ideological or partisan, and even the issues that they care about are slightly different from that broader electorate. So going into November, we can expect an electorate that cares more about pocketbook issues and a little bit less about the hyper-partisan debates that are happening in Washington. I will say, nonetheless, this is an election where people actually cast ballots. And so we do get to ask questions and look at the tea leaves and look at the polls, as you've been doing all night, Lindsay. And one thing does really stick out to me, which is that Nikki Haley is in some ways acting, her voters are in some ways acting as a protest vote to Donald Trump at this point. I think a lot of folks know that Donald Trump is on his way to winning the Republican nomination. But she's still getting somewhere between, mid-20s, 40, and in Vermont, even 50% of the vote. And that does highlight a vulnerability for Trump because those Nikki Haley voters are more towards the middle of the partisan spectrum, which puts them closer to Joe Biden and makes him vulnerable to losing those voters. The protest vote that we've seen against Joe Biden so far is to his left flank. That's folks that disagree with him on the administration's policy as regards the war in Gaza and support of Israel. Because those folks are not towards the middle or more to the right from Biden, they don't have an option of anywhere to go on the left. They don't have a more left option come the general election. But Nikki Haley supporters, they do. And that can create a difficult dynamic for the former president.
And what do you make of Haley's win in Vermont as far as what are the exit polls they're telling you?
Yeah, it's a good question, Lindsay. And really what it tells me is this era of the diploma divide, which is to say that whether or not you have a 4-year college degree in America goes a long way towards determining how you view politics and how you end up voting. That is still very much alive. It really sort of hit American politics in full force in 2016, where we saw a big split amongst college-educated voters and non-college-educated voters, with those with a diploma, voting for Hillary Clinton back in 2016, and those without voting for Donald Trump. And at this point, we don't just see it between the two parties, we see it within the Republican Party. So Republicans who have a college degree are turning out and voting for Nikki Haley in much higher numbers. And going into tonight, we thought there were some states where Nikki Haley could overperform based on those voters that she does well with. And they are states like Massachusetts, Vermont, Virginia, Colorado. She didn't perform all that well in Colorado, Virginia, and Massachusetts, but it looks like she's pulling out a win in Vermont. And that's in large part because of this education divide that we have in America. That's a big switch from where we've historically been. Historically, Democrats won the working class. They used to win the majority of non-college educated voters, whereas Republicans were winning a majority of college educated voters. And this has consequences for our politics that extend beyond just a primary election or the election this fall, because these voters have different policy priorities. And so what the two parties pursue once they're in power might end up being different. So this is a really important trend in American politics to follow. And the question is, does this trend continue? Are we further separated by educational attainment and the worldview that presents us? Or do we start to bridge that divide? And Joe Biden has said that he's reaching out to the working class, especially in the post-industrial Midwest and places like that. But we have not seen much movement in the polls of non-college educated voters going back towards Biden. So that's going to be a question that I'm going to be tracking for the coming 8 months as we get ready for this general election.
Yeah, so interesting, the divide there. And historically, as you say, Donald Trump hasn't really been able to pick up the suburban voters and those college towns. Gail and Drew, our thanks to you. And this just in, the race for California Senate race for the partial term, ABC News projects Schiff and Garvey will advance to the general election in November. And we turn once again to ABC News contributor and editor of the National Review, Rematch, as well as ABC News contributor and former senator from North Dakota, Heidi Heitkamp. Thank you both so much for staying up late with us. And first to you, Ramesh, what do you make of this pivot now to the general election? What do you think that general election cycle might look like?
Well, I think it is going to be a dispiriting clash between two elderly politicians who are unpopular. And it is not going to be a blowout, I think, for either man. It's going to be it certainly looks as though it is going to be a very tight and a very negative race and a very dispirited one.
And Heidi, I want to bring you in here. Are you surprised that despite all the scandals that Trump has faced, being found guilty of sexual assault, being impeached twice, right on Capitol on January 6th, that he is still the presumptive nominee for the Republican Party?
Doesn't surprise me a bit, Lindsay. I mean, what we know about Donald Trump, we've known for the last how many years, and it hasn't changed minds at all. It's not new discoveries. And the more he feels like a victim, the more he talks like a victim, the more people dig in the far MAGA movement. But I think what's interesting is these down ballot races. What happened in North Carolina, basically nominating a very, very extreme governor's candidate. California is important to Democrats because now you have a Republican versus Democrat race, which means California money won't be invested just in a California race. You've got an interesting thing playing out in Texas, in Florida. And so I think to me, I look at this as an important structure for down ballot, and can that affect some of these suburban voters who Trump needs desperately to basically carry swing states. So, it's really remarkable that this party would nominate someone who has so failed to represent American values, but yet it's not surprising.
And Rematch, do you expect to see Donald Trump's strategy will change now? Do you think he might try and embrace moderate Republicans, embrace Haley supporters, for example, even though he told them already, if you're giving your money to Haley, I don't want it?
Well, I think that Trump's problems with the kind of voters who backed Haley predate Haley. He has had a problem with college-educated voters. He's had a problem with women, younger women, especially middle-aged women. Those are things that he's going to have to tackle if he wants to win the general election. I think the question here is not just a question of strategy. It's a question of disposition. It's a question of capability. There are times that he sounds the sort of higher notes of politics, and he talks about including people and building the coalition, but rarely does that last for very long.
And Heidi, I want to bring you back in here. President Biden released a statement just a short time ago saying that Trump would set the country back. He's now asking for support once again. What else are you hearing from the Democratic Party tonight?
I think you're hearing still some concerns about whether Joe Biden can carry the top of the ticket. But, I think if you're Joe Biden, you're thrilled that it is clear that he's not going to be running against Nikki Haley. He's going to be running against Donald Trump. And that is a much better position for him to be in going into this next election.